engage with you early. The second phase of today will be to discuss how advocacy could occur for these priorities, which we'll determine today. And then on the 19th of March, we'll return to you based on any insights from today and finalise the priorities we agree. Okay, so this brings us to the results and analysis from our last session. This shows both our overarching themes and the subtopics that you were asked to refine and prioritise last session. The numbers in the brackets represents the numbers of votes that we had around the table. You can see that we have some key themes of land use and urban development, economic growth, tourism, and workforce. These are our main ones. Following this, we had local government, energy, infrastructure and resilience, and culture and heritage. Key subtopics, which was really interesting to see, were new funding models for growth and infrastructure, and value capture from tourism and visitor economies. That's interesting. About 14 topics were not selected as a priority, so they're not reflected in the heat map as it stands on the slide. But the full list of topics is outlined on slides 16 to 17 for your reference. So yeah, the solid bubbles represents the top 8 subtopics across the table. So that's then reflected in our overarching heat map, I guess, which is on the slide. I guess what's evident is that we have 4 clear priorities. These are in our biggest bubbles. And then 4 priorities that are perhaps on the margins. So we have local energy infrastructure for future growth, local health infrastructure, economic development and diversification, and community inclusivity and well-being. So I guess the primary objective of this workshop is to then refine those ones that are perhaps on the margin, or revise the document as it stands now, so that we can make those key changes that we discussed last session to improve our advocacy, quality and impact. So then on that note, I'll pass over to Carrie to walk us through the slides.
Yeah, more appropriately, sorry, for me to turn it over to you guys. So on this slide, on the left-hand side, what we'd like to do is, with a view to those 8 bubbles, we've got a sheet that's got them on, and would like you to individually consider what are your must-haves. Like, the council can't succeed without these. You know, that they're likely externally driven, so where active engagement will make a real difference. The middle option there is a nice to have, where it's important but not core. Thank you.
Oh,
It's not in your materials. Did you want to?
No, it's fine. I just didn't think we'd get to this point where we're excluding a bunch of things based on walking around the room and chucking some numbers out.
So the object of this exercise. Yeah, totally. So Caitlin, if you want to hand that out, and then we can put it over to you guys to do that exercise and then discuss. But we thought would be helpful to guide the discussion was the idea of this is what the council views as being a must-have, that it needs to focus in on what it might see as being important. And this is with respect to external advocacy. It's not being dismissed, it's how we engage with it. And then what are the topics that are the council probably is going to let this go, and this is not saying it's not important, it's based on it not being at this time. It may come back to being that at a later time. So it's about where it is at in this phase in terms of prioritization. So none of this is meant to diminish the importance, using that term, of any of the topics. It's more of a risk assessment of where the council can focus in on its resources now to see the most benefit. So it shifts from being a bit more of a priority ranking to a risk and necessity.
So the question that flows on from that is how often are we going to do this?
Yeah.
What is the phase?
Yeah,
What is
it's
the
been a
phase?
really, really good question. I mean, our view is that as staff, in order for us to put resources in and do the deep dive, we need more than, a few months. It's open to the council to obviously revisit this whenever it chooses to, but for continuity, it would be our preference to hang on to it for, likely a year.
Okay. Just to add a little bit to this, this exercise has provided a framework to lead thinking through this. I would not be surprised at all if you look at this and get this and go, oh, I don't think that does necessarily characterise where I feel the most important advocacy points are. So this is an opportunity to revisit that. There will be a third opportunity when we bring a paper to council, again, in a slightly different format and forum, to change it again, should you want to, if you've given it more thought and reflection, conversation. And as Carrie says, actually we haven't got a prescribed cadence in mind. We're happy to take guidance in relation to that because this is a new territory for us. That might be something that we set an initial timeline and then review it at a certain point anyway, just to see how it's starting to feel
And
for
it
us.
would probably be in relation to where the government's at. This is government advocacy. So after the election, in a certain period after we get to.
So I think it's fair to say that the priorities that have been identified probably recognise the now priorities, and it's actually these are in the arena right now. I mean, all of the advocacy topics are important along the journey, but I guess what I'm seeing in that heat map is a recognition of what's burning right now, and what are the current opportunities where
So if you could take a few minutes and populate the table, we'll collect that after. The only rule as is theirs is that you can only choose 4 or 5 as being a must-have, and then we'll discuss, and then we'd like to shift with what time we have after that discussion into what that might look like, and that's largely a brainstorm as to what councillors would like to see. So
Do you want names on these?
that's up to you. I don't have a strong preference. If you want to be noted, then that's fine. But if you prefer to stay anonymous, that's also fine. We'll be coming back to the council with this information, not with names attached to it.
Okay, so no names needed.
yes. And then so when we talk about advocacy and obviously the staff resources that go with that, some of this will depend upon whether it's stuff that we're driving internally and having to lead, or whether it's just other people that we're influencing. We're not going to be driving a big thing on local health infrastructure because it's not our key thing, but we may be wanting to work to influence. I guess at some stage it'll be important to understand the staffing time resource, which might be different, something that we're really leading charge on, to something that we're maybe working alongside other people. I don't know, that's just putting that out there. But something to help us understand, because if we've got a limited resource in staff to do this, how that chunks down into core work, working with others.
Your one is a limited resource
Yes.
to do this. I mean, primarily this will drive a work program with policy planning. But obviously, for each of these areas, there are SMEs elsewhere in the organisation that are engaged to varying degrees on the matters. So, the type of programme that is put in place for each one would vary in terms of the exact amount of staff resources, and depending on the mechanisms that would be effective for that specific issue. Some of these issues may have working groups associated with them. Some of them, it may be just a digital approach that's being taken. So it would vary depending on the topic. That's fine.
Sorry, can I just ask a clarification question? You've got the second one, the economic development and diversification, and then EG, international visitor levy. But I feel like you've covered international visitor levy in the first one, and also the new funding models for growth and infrastructure. So it's sitting there 3 times. I don't think economic development and diversification should include the international visitor levy. Because that's separate, in my opinion. It should be diversification from something else, tourism, the economy. So can we cross that out?
I think cross that out from economic development and diversification, and under new funding models for growth, I think that's other than visitor levy, correct? Yes.
Yeah, it could be anything.
So the use of the word levy there is no good.
Just following on a comment from Michelle, I think we need to go back to the genesis of this and the fact that, when you compare the amount of time we're spending on submitting things is very disproportionate to both the size of the organisation and our capacity. So there is an element of choice, there's an element of letting go of some things because it's just not practical. And I think we really need to, and the exercise for council is to say, what are the things that are most important to this community that we want to be able to have a say on, so that we can actually put the right resources in rather than scattergunning ourselves so widely, and then having the risk that actually, if we're not talking on a topic that's fundamental to us, then we're not probably likely to be listened to particularly well.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I was going to echo that because, the reason this has started is to avoid we're spread thinly doing a lot of things and allow us to really develop that expertise. Comments, questions?
Just following up on your observation and then the comments that followed. There's also the expertise that sits around the council table too, rather than just staff. And I wonder if we need to think about that again. Because there is, in a range of things, there's expertise and interest in the council that perhaps could be leveraged more, and in fact influence and connections that could be used perhaps more so. So we need to take that balance. View staff critical, sure, but so is the role of council and mayor in doing that, and we need to get that set right. And it differs for probably each topic.
That's my only comment to that, John, is that ultimately while there will be individual skill sets and individual connections, ultimately you are speaking as council.
Sure.
So you've got to make sure that that's moderated by the fact that Gavin might have a strong view on seismic strengthening, but actually the rest of the council might differ with it.
Yeah. And often when I'm asked to comment, the briefing is provided from staff, the background and the information and our submission points. So yes.
We were quite invigorated at the last workshop to hear that elected members working to play more of a role in the advocacy space. And certainly when we get into building programs around some of these topics, there will be opportunities that you will have to interface with influential points in the system, but we won't. And then we can help support you and make sure you've got the data and facts and the evidence that you might need in those environments as well.
Can I ask a clarification? What's the difference or the main difference between in the civil defence and emergency management, the two policies there? There's one, the National Climate Change Adaptation and Resilience Policy, and then there's the civil defence management and recovery policy. Because I would probably now, if it's kind of given a scope of a year, I would change to this, but I don't really know what one I would pick. This one.
I think that's distinguishing between the regional response versus the national. We've had regional plans that we respond to with ORC and such, whereas there's climate change adaptation and resilience policies that come from MFB and we respond to those.
So what one do you think is better for us to advocate for?
I think that's a challenging one. Hey, it comes back to how you cut it. Like the voice might be stronger for regional proposals, but equally you're influencing the framework if you respond to national proposals. So it's a bit of a challenging one.
I'm really struggling with this because there are things that are our core that are just left off, and I don't understand why. We don't know when things are coming. But anyway, this feels like a...
Just clarifying that, I mean, there are things that are core to council's business. This is related to our external advocacy. So we are not trying to minimize things that are absolutely core to business. It may not be where we choose to advocate externally because this system is operating. It's not in a place of change right now. I'm just trying to think of an example without providing a pain point. So it's not trying to say what council's core business is.
And so can I ask a question about local government? We've got local government system change and local government regulatory reforms. Can you distinguish between those for me?
So the system change one is
thing.
On the bubble slide before, under local government is, I'm looking at the bubble page, previous slide.
So that will relate to slide 16, electoral.
So
Sorry.
this slide. And you've got a bubble for local government, and in there you've got two bubbles, one local government system change and the other one regulatory reforms. I mean, it's just a case of what are they? I mean, when we tagged them the other day, did people really understand where this exercise was going, what the different bubbles really meant?
Yeah,
I don't know.
good forum to discuss that. I just, slide 16
We
does
may-
provide the bullet points about examples of those areas. Like obviously we haven't had, a fully digestive conversation about what local government system change means, but the slide 16 that was presented on the 29th of January offered a bit of a snapshot. And so this is a good forum to say, I understood local government system change to mean this. What do you mean?
Why would we not just do both? I mean, local government regulatory reforms, that's right in front of us right now. It seems artificial to.
I think that's what your results are showing, that actually both of them are really important to the council.
Well, when it comes to this, I mean, what you've got on the tick slide is local government system change, including change to service delivery and electoral reform. That's very narrow. Can we add to that, I guess, is my question. So we could put and local government regulatory reforms.
I think that also speaks to the policy cycle that we spoke about last session, Ricky, is that very frequently we respond to the system level change like simplifying local government, and then later in the policy cycle we have the regulatory technical submissions that staff will proceed to do, but this tries to make the distinguishment between the overarching reform at the beginning of the policy cycle, and then as it gets more and more granular it would become a technical.
So it's lasting for a year. Would it be prudent to include both?
I mean, you could agree that actually both of those are equally as important. I think it's showing in the bubble that together they're
Part of the same system, it's just a linear thing. So if it's lasting a year, then we start with that, but it's going to progress to the other, and we may not have gone through the cycle again.
Yeah, but I mean, we're not suggesting separate those two out necessarily, are we?
Yes, well, on this page it is, and on the bubble.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to combine them as that would be very valid.
Sorry.
No. It's a really good example of how difficult this is to do as an activity. And I think this is a muscle that we're only just starting to exercise as a council. So we'll use this as a starting point. We're going to have to keep working on this, focusing on it, on better ways to do it.
So, go back to Nicola's questions there about climate change adaptation and what all the emergency management sort of defence is going from language. And so there's a submission put together by the regional committee on that now, draft one, the joint committee is going to talk about that shortly. But that, and particularly the environment bill, are going to put in the area of risk management more responsibility on territorial authorities than previously, including the chief executive being responsible for ensuring that that's all in place, which isn't the case at the moment. So, and that's going to be a process of about 5 years of ongoing engagement and investment. So some of these things, and maybe we need to map them out and see what.
Yep, sorry to cut you short there, Councillor Mitchell, but we went through this process, and these are the ones.
Yeah, sure.
Are the ones that we as a group decided were important for us to have our policy team start looking at and start advocating. There will be other things that will come up, I can see down the track, but I think for the purposes of this year, for example, the things that we've identified, from my perspective, is where I want our policy team to be focusing their efforts.
Agreed. So
And I know that we've only gone through a very high level sticker exercise,
Yeah.
but it does show some themes that I think are important for us for this year. But my question always comes back to, this is probably a question for Mike and for Michelle, is you can, at what point does, when you're advocating for something, and you realise that government is just not going to listen, at what point do you go, well, no point throwing a whole lot of effort at that because they're not going to change their minds on it. So that's for me is a big question for you and your team is around at what point can you actually change things with that ethics?
I think
And how much energy do you throw at it, you know?
in theory, we can adjust that as we go along. But I think as a policy team, we're unlikely to sit and make any calls around we should stop because we're concerned with the efficacy of what's happening. We'd look at the mechanisms to try and make them as effective as possible to deliver on the wishes of this council to get our point across on this matter. So that would be more where we'd be coming from with it. But I think we've heard on multiple topics around the table that there's been frustration with how some of these things are landing and whether or not it's actually making any difference in Wellington. So that is something that is worth staying live to.
Well, I think
Especially in the next.
I sort of sense that people are saying we can't adapt and follow our nose if something, we don't know what we don't know, what's going to come out of this. I mean, the way I see this is that broad heading gives us scope to follow our nose a bit on, that broad topic. In the areas that are most important to us. So I'm not quite sure why there's a fear that it's going to constrain us. I see this the opposite. It's sort of quite broad, and we can follow our nose a bit as things evolve. Is that fair to say?
That is very fair to say. And that's certainly our intent, because I think we are mindful that as we go forward, there will be things that arise that become a
We just don't
significant
know.
concern. We don't want to be unhelpful in that.
No,
we might get
so we
another-
can adapt and evolve. Yeah. So I mean, are we sort of trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist? Because I think there's scope to do that.
God, I think we've got another government announcement in 2 weeks' time about
Yeah.
set up reform.
It's
We would
Tuesday
think
at 1 o'clock.
Right, yeah,
But the reality is we wouldn't say we're not going to talk about that because it wasn't our heat map. Yeah, and I think that's the point. Things will pop up. There's an opportunity. We've done a lot of work on whether it's the climate stuff in the past. There's a whole heap of stuff. And I think what we're talking about is what are we trying to actively, sort of whack-a-mole as the different opportunities come up. We've got one there, we've got one there, and that's going to change. And I think the councillors, sort of need to have the confidence that we've got a team of staff that will identify those changes and say, hey, we need to do some stuff here, or something slipped off the programme. It's because this has happened because there's an opportunity.
I think that's a good characterisation. I mean, this is also an opportunity for us to share with the group as well that at the minute we're somewhat gridlocked in a policy thinking sense around submissions and being reactive. We want to be more proactive. This would help us to be proactive. It's really not meant to be closing down doors or definitively walking away with a list of things that we're not going to think about anything else.
Yeah, just to add to Michelle's point, I mean, we've heard time and again, what would be better to be able to have more discourse around before circulating a draft submission with 5 days to comment, have meaningful, proactive policy positions. And right now we're not in a position to do that. And so this exercise is to try to get to that place with respect to a confined area.
Well, let's go back to Stephen's point. I mean, I think what we have is both in local, and they won't always get it entirely reflected of us, but local government New Zealand and Totara both have very competent teams that are engaged. And I think, there's an old adage that basically says if you're having to make a submission, you've lost the war, because you should be influencing. And there are instances where clearly, where we feel strongest is where government or the likes of LGNZ or Totara will actually reach out to us and say, can you provide some early comment on this? Can you join this group? Can you join that group? And we've had staff involved across water, across tourism, across RM. Now, we may not always evidently see our particular outcome front and centre, but we will have that opportunity to have that input. And I think that's a valuable thing that the council has grown over time. There's actually a number of things we are seen as a very strong, if not a leading voice. And if you go to things like tourism accommodation levies and the tourism system, we are a leading voice in that discussion. And that's really important for us. And I think that gets reflected in then what we can what the team is best placed to support the council with, because we have that degree of competency in those areas and a recognise.
I think the underlying tension is that there's some underlying different priorities between central and local government, really, both in our context and the broader context, and that they want, to tell us what to do. We want more autonomy, and we want more money from them, and they want to keep more money in their pocket. So, there's an underlying tension that we're just never going to resolve, but we need to just keep finding that balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we've seen in legislation that's come through, say, over at least the last 5 years, is a greater degree of power being held by ministers. They've walked back from in that sense that Parliament sets legislation and the courts interpret it. They want to hold that level of control. So yeah, and that's a constant tension there for us and for local government as a whole.
If we set our priorities and then government were to come to us on another topic, would you take our priorities as meaning that we wouldn't respond directly to a request from?
Well, I mean, it's probably a good junction. It's just this conversation then to, you've had a bit of time with the sheet in front of you. What does the council envisage how this plays out? Because that will provide us as staff with a way to have a meeting of minds on what you're picturing and how we can support that. Because as the slides outline, our staff role there is different than what an elected member politician's role is. We want to support you with the information you need proactively. Your role is quite different as the external facing.
But perhaps me to try and answer that more specifically.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it would be highly unlikely that government would come to us and ask us about a topic that we probably hadn't already, through either staff or other commentary, signalled a level of competency or interest in. But if it did, that would be something I would imagine in the first instance. You'd go to, Michelle would go to the mayor and say, well, with somebody asked to have a view on this, is this something we want to get into?
I think it's almost like for each particular topic, you almost need to triage, equivalent of a significance policy. So, we've got some, well, we know this is likely to be, based on whatever, some sort of, whether some of the topics come in, but I think it'd be helpful for a particular topic, health infrastructure or whatever, to actually have a bit of a mind map about who are the players, and this is kind of speaks to your how. So who is it that we're either working with, or who are we trying to influence? What are the opportunities to do that? Because in terms of navigating that space of influence, then who are our fellow partners? Who do we support because they're already doing a great job? Or this is something we need to lead on. But then if we lead on, who is it that we're trying to lead to? So I think, you can almost have a strategy for advocacy for each of these key topics. So I think that would help us understand the players and the game board.
I would completely agree that we can go away and do that for each of the topics, probably not the 8, and that's why we didn't come to you today with all of that. But I think that's a really logical next step, is showing where our existing working groups have you exist as well.
Presumably LGNZ is forefront and centre in local government before. So surely we should be piggybacking on for being involved in a lot of what they're up to and what they're submitting on.
Yeah, and also the fact most of the reforms that you've discussed in the last little while, we've probably had at least an inquiry from LGNZ that says, well, what's your team doing? Are you doing something? Have you got a particular position on this?
Or they ask for a specific example. We need an example.
Or an example, yeah.
An example of the impact of rate capping to go in here. So they're actually really good. And when you read their submissions on like the simplification, there's really good stamps, really good suggestions in there, some of which may have come from other councils. I think that's the strength that comes out of those.
They often will ask us for information. I mean, they're often coming to us for a view on a high growth environment and a high visitation environment. So obviously they circulate their drafts at officer levels all the way through the processes. I mean, they are slammed by the sheer number that come out as well, but they've been keeping their head above water. And I think that's definitely helpful in the medical community.
the difference in there between the advocacy and the technical expertise. And you're able to go out, this is not going to constrain your ability to give technical expertise where that's requested.
So the point I was going to make earlier, of course, Sue made this good point as well, was that what we can do, I think, is in all of that, look at the timeframes. So some of these are about to be almost put to bed. So the water reform is almost done, but there's others that are coming, some of which, even if there were to be a change of government, they'll still be on the table. Some of them could be changes as well. So there's a strategic need for us to be involved in some of those. Others, they're hot for the moment, but they're going to die away. And then there's others that we can see will be coming up later. So maybe that's where you're going, John. We need to look at that big continuum of what we're likely to be involved in and what in there is the most important for us to engage in and put our resources into.
You raise a good point there, this question of the cadence and the review
Yeah.
process. When we come back to you next time, we'll come back with some options around that and just put some thinking into what that could look like.
That'd be cool. I'm a little confused on exactly, it feels quite generic and hard to sort of pinpoint on what the topic we're talking about now is, but I guess I'll throw this in. For me, I find one of the problems that we struggle with is being overly complicated or overly technical. And it's a lot because a lot of the decision makers aren't reading through the majority of the text and we know it's sort of being filtered through other means. I guess part of my want and need is to be really direct and simple and accountable so that other politicians can see exactly what we need from them in order to solve our own problems. And whether or not we need to be more holistic, rather than having like 20 different areas in between, you go, this is our story. These are the things that we need to solve, and here's how we solve them. Here's how we turbocharge the economy, growth, or housing. But here's all the blockers that are stopping them. Because I think like having a better story that contextualizes everything in context is easier for somebody in Wellington who is, considering 50% council nuance to detail. Whether or not we have that entrenched with all the other more specific, detailed pieces that go into actual legislation as well.
I think it's an excellent point, and I think we do need to have that hot, holistic, strategic story really clear. Actually, interestingly, the regional deal gave us the opportunity to start to do that and to sort of tell it in our own words. The problem and the challenges with these submissions is we're having to develop a policy position in response to a technical document. And in order to engage with that technical document, we're having to speak their language, use their references, and just really reacting to what they put in front of us. And that's just not a great way to be doing that. If we can get front foot on that, we can tell our story on a certain area, we understand what our position is, and then we take that position and we adapt it to the opportunities that arise to tell that story.
Yeah, I think there's a balance to that though. I mean, I take the point is that sometimes being over technical, even to a select committee or something, doesn't resonate or doesn't have power. We're telling our story that is in scope and relevant to the topic at hand in a way that's relevant to us. I think
It's more the how than what.
because you take a topic like freedom camping, and until you actually understand the impact on the community, for instance, you're just talking at a very high level, and the technical matters don't really help. Being overly technical doesn't really help because it doesn't address the core problem, but telling them the story, how it really affects the people is more powerful.
I think just to add on to Cody's comments that we'd love to do more of is the closing the loop with the community in terms of we did this and this was the outcome. Right now we're chasing our tail with just the constant string of submissions that we're not able to do that in the way we'd like to. So I think that's quite important to our community understanding what we've done and what traction has been made. Right now, here's the submission, here's the policy position, but we don't actually say what that means.
Yeah, I guess that's also to move on to more how elected members are integrated, how that political sort of body is, fluent with the technical expertise, and I guess how we're prepared in the same respect with, as John was saying before, in terms of answering with that level of consistency, whilst keeping, everybody politically free to speak their mind. It's just more the fact of
ensuring that we have continuity every time that we're telling the story so that it's sinking in a good way. And I guess the other aspect is like reverse engineering what's worked. I've looked at a lot of taxpayers union advocacy pieces, really creative, really different, and I think when things stick out, it feels like a marketing challenge more so than anything else, and that in order to sell or reach your market, being the same as everybody else is just making you disappear. So how do you do it in a different way?
I think, in my sense, at the moment, we're just swamped in a very reactive space to a lot of change and reform. Totally understand that. But, so it's how do we make space to pick up the next topic to take forward, like the equivalent of the local accommodation supplement, which was something which was picked up by this district and led, and the whole heap of work done about that. So I think we're mostly feeling we're just responding at the moment. So how do we make space to identify what the next issue is that's not on the table that we actually want to get on the table? And I think that's
not in the government space.
Yeah.
We need to advocate regardless of what they're doing.
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard in a constrained bandwidth when you're sort of, it's like trying to learn to swim whilst you're wearing a life jacket.
I think the interesting thing as well is we need to have the space to build the consensus and for you to really traverse points of difference on a topic. Where we really struggle is when we're on a tight timeline, developer submission, we're developing the policy position as we go, and there's complete disagreement amongst the elected members. Now, we've not had that for a little while. It does happen. And then, you're in the situation going, are we submitting or not submitting? Which side's going to win the battle? And when you're actually putting a submission together based on number of, 6 votes, 7 votes, something like that, it's not very productive, and it's not helping us actually really achieve the outcome we're trying to.
What I'm feeling is that there's we're talking about advocacy and we're talking about responsiveness almost. And to your point, Cody, I feel like we want to advocate for certain topics, of where we want to be in the future, what we want to lead instead of how we respond. So I think we're almost getting confused when we're ticking, because it's or are you asking us to say, you don't need to respond to this and focus on being more advocating towards our main goals, Yeah.
This is reactive.
Yeah. Do we want to be reactive or do we want to be proactive?
Well, yeah, and I think what we're being presented with is a way to be proactive, is in order to not have to address everything. In order to take that time, you have to say no to stuff, right? We've all learned what that is. So I respect that, where we have seniority or leadership or influence in those core topics, I think we all have somewhat consensus around that being a priority, and that exercise has sort of reflected that. And I guess from my point of view, I'd much rather be spending time on things we can move rather than things we can't. And given that it's so disruptive, stepping into the void and taking leadership on that stuff. And then another point, whilst we're talking, part of it is, whether we've got a lot of head, how do we add the heart? The two streams of influences, you can speak to the engineer that's talking about numbers and metrics, but you can tell the story that connects with people in a way that's quite visceral and emotive. And whether or not our submissions could include some more heart aspect or some more storytelling or more aspects of that really connect with a different part of people in order to
as interpreted by the AOA.
Yeah, potentially. But I mean, it might be a different. We human beings are engineered for storytelling, and whilst this may not be read by human beings, I still think it's an important part of advocacy in order to help explain things that are quite multifaceted.
Just make one comment on that, and that is, the minute you're in that formal submission phase, you are dealing with people who are going to be, whether it's AI or individual staff members, they are going to be narrowing it down to facts and figures. I mean, the key human advocacy comes in the advocacy that you as councillors and mayor have with local MPs and sort of party MPs that you want to influence. And, we just at the beginning of this year began sending our friend camping reports to the local MPs. We've only ever had, I think, one acknowledge they've got it. But that's that storytelling. I think that's where you as councillors and as as advocates for your community, have the opportunity to influence subtly, but with a real human dimension.
I think I've just add to what Mike said that, that the more space we have to think about the whole advocacy program and not just the submission at the end, the more opportunities there are to bring that whole into that.
Yeah. I was just wondering if you can clarify whether actually every submission is going to be AI processed. Is this
We receive notifications saying that our submissions are analysed by AI from central government agencies. Yes.
and so I guess when we think about it that way and picking up on Katie's point about this is a marketing exercise, actually, have we got any thoughts on how we're going to treat this so that we can amplify our voice through AI?
Buzzwords.
I'm being quite serious here. I know we're sort of joking about it, but this is the reality we live in right now. Is the analysis up in Wellington is not being done by a human, so we need to play the same game that they're playing here as well. So
Every paragraph starts, we think the government is wrong because.
Start creating a narrative. Yeah.
I think again, that is when we do put a submission in, that's maybe something we need to think about the optimization for AI. But the more influence we have for that process should mean that actually, the proposal that's been put out to us is something we want in the first place.
Yeah.
So, it's taking the pressure off that submission at the end, but you're not basically should be.
and I guess if I use the marketing analogy here, a simple message is always key. And when I look at your heat map here, it's no surprise to me that it actually mirrors our regional deal. A lot of it is regional deal related, and the big one is funding and infrastructure. So our message is pretty clear still, and we can look at all the other smaller submissions and burn ourselves out potentially. But the key message has to always come back to funding, because we cannot do anything in this district without money. That's the reality for us. So if that message flows into almost every submission we make, that would make a heck of a lot of sense to me. And then on a side note, if we're wanting to get our politicians involved a bit more, we've got chairs, deputy chairs, and potentially portfolio holders. So you don't need to go to the full council potentially on some of the smaller matters. But if you want to potentially go, what does the council think about us submitting on this? Just talk to the portfolio or the chair and the mayor and maybe get a bit of a feel for it first before you go to full council. So we don't all have to be involved in it. And you are getting expertise in those portfolio holders and those chairs as well on that subject.
Mindful of the time that we're at the end of the session.
I think that's given us enough information. Obviously, we've been clear that this isn't a one-off, and when we come to council with a formal report, it's going to have a few options of places you can move into or something. Really grateful for your time and energy on this. We know that it hasn't been done, so there's it's not an easy one.
Okay, thank you. So we'll just pass these.
Yeah, come on.
Wrong answer.
Oh,
you.
sorry.
I thought Mike was pulling them up.
They will be,
Why are they fitting?
whilst you don't have your name on them, they will be fingerprinted. So, next item on the agenda, the workshop this morning relates to Queenstown lakefront trading, and I'm going to pass that over to staff team for the background and the discussion.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
While we get the presentation up, just might do introductions. So I think you might have met Anto at our introduction session as our regulatory manager. And Izzy's busy trying to get the presentation up, so she's the author writer, but we'll be sending most of the. So really what this workshop's about is preparing you for a decision that we need you to make at the next council meeting on the 19th of March. And this is really getting everyone up to speed. So this is new for some people. And what this isn't is about the bylaw. This is about the monitoring and enforcement of that bylaw. So the bylaw is dealt with in another way. This is really just about how you can help us to enforce that bylaw. The background slide gives you the reason why we need a decision and how you want us to, as monitoring and enforcer, is going to be really important for us. Start.
Perfect. And thank you all for your time today. My name is Isabella Ogies. I'm the Monitoring Enforcement and Environmental Manager here at FBRDC. I'll be running through a quick presentation and then we'll open to the room for discussion or as Catherine mentioned, today's focus is on the Queenstown Lakefront Traders and Associated Activities in Public Places bylaw. On the screen behind me is an overview of what I will be running through. Where we will be discussing monitoring and enforcement of the bylaw, what we've seen over the past year, and some information around that process. The background is that on the 17th of April 2025, the Council resolved to prohibit pop-up stalls trading from the lakefront for a period of 1 year, and that is ending soon, being 17th of April 2026 of this year. On the screen behind me, you can see in green the area in question being the Queenstown Lakefront. And what this approach meant is that as we near the ending of the prohibition period, we anticipate there to be only around 1 to 2 traders with permission for pop-up stalls to be located within this section of land.
1 to 2.
They haven't expired.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Background to the prohibition. The report from the 17th of April 2025 council meeting was appended to this presentation, and that report itself does canvass the background that led to the prohibition. The key areas identified, key concerns identified within this report that led to the initial prohibition include significant ongoing non-compliance from pop-up stalls with duration of stay and separation requirements under the bylaw, complaints received from members of the public, congestion, accessibility and equity concerns, and observed damage to council infrastructure from fat, waste and oil residue.
Isabel, can I just ask a quick question? Just on that area, so does the area stop outside Patagonia? It doesn't carry on towards the main town pier. So what's the space between that, the two piers? They're not, we not own that, or do we not control that? Or
My understanding from memory, which I can confirm after this, is that it is reserved land in that particular
that point,
area.
between those 2 points, I think.
Yes, and then to the right almost along the
Right. So our bylaw doesn't cover that. It only covers this green space. It doesn't carry on down to the main town pier.
That is the main pier down here.
No, it's not. It's that export, but that's Patagonia there. You've got iCards. So I'm just wanting to just double check the area that I'm thinking about.
That is the main
That is
down
the
here.
main,
Yeah.
that's the code.
That's the KG.
Where's iCards?
Off the screen.
Off screen to the right.
That's
The lakefront area where
No,
Where's
there's not
the-
two. There's actually
Mine's
not
up there,
two.
but Ballard Street, and things down there.
It does too. So that's where it stops, the main town pier.
So it's
And the area
between there and the Memorial Gate is the bit you're talking about.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Sorry.
So the piece we're referring to from further down or either side is reserved land. Right. The context for bylaws sort of a legislation where there isn't other legislation that applies.
Right.
So on reserved land, you need to meet reserved provisions.
So, am I correct in saying you can't trade on the reserve land without a separate type of permit. And
You
that's
need to-
unlikely, they're unlikely to have that. in that
You
location.
need to go through a reserve license process, and then you've got to meet different provision limitations. Which is like,
Just to clarify, it's a confusion, so the road that you drive along between the Lake Walk and ICART,
Marine Parade.
Marine Parade, if that is not road reserve, that is reserved.
it's not a legal road in there.
And there's permits available, people with permits can trade that.
If it is a road, designated as a road parcel, this bylaw would be applicable to that, and so there is an avenue in which people can apply for a permit to trade in a location outside of the permitted area. If it is reserved land, however, which I can confirm after, so I just don't know off the top of my head, they would need both a reserves permit and approval under this bylaw.
And just looking at the property maps, you're correct that the reserve, as it extends right down to the bathhouse and beyond, extends along the beach and the part of the wall along Marine Parade, and then there's a legal road between the seawall and the ICARTs. That is a legal road between the Marine Parade, but there's both, yeah. But that's the bit where they trade that isn't in the corridor of Marine Parade would largely be within the reserve, as in part against the wall.
I'm still confused about the green belt. I'm really sorry. Obviously, the bylaw applies to a wider area and people trade up near the toilets and around that wider area. Why have we got this green belt on this picture?
This is where most of the people are doing the trading, where the problem is.
But that's not related to the bylaw. It's not a defined area in the bylaw, is it? But what I'm saying is that whole area is,
This isn't allowable, like the bylaw defines where you can't go.
yeah.
And this is an area where you can if you're meeting the bylaw requirements.
So you're saying you can't trade. So if you looked at that green area between the toilet block and the green area, would you say, does the bylaw say you can't trade in there?
That's reserves land.
So the park is reserved.
So Glenville Park's reserved, so is the space between the bright green area and the buildings.
Okay.
So that's also reserved in there. So
So the only place that they can trade under the bylaw and meeting reserve requirements is that green strip.
That particular strip on the screen is established as a permitted area or currently prohibited. The bylaw is applicable to the district or council owned land. And there is an avenue under the bylaw, under a permit application where traders can choose to apply to trade outside of a permitted area.
Right, so if you wanted to trade between the toilet and the green area, you would need a reserves permit and to be compliant with the bylaw and everything. Thank you, sorry.
And then just to confirm that the green area is the area that was subject to the prohibition that council has previously made the resolution. Yeah. So it doesn't affect them all or the other areas.
The council resolution from the 17th April 2025 meeting is on the screen, and two key points from that was one, that the prohibition was adopted for a period of 1 year for pop-up stalls on the Queenstown lakefront, and also the third point on the screen there, that it was agreed that there would be immediate cessation of issuing further permits for pop-up stalls within the Queenstown town centre zone. That includes the Beach Street and the more permitted areas.
So it was kind of option 4, but amended.
Was very complicated.
Complicated, yeah, it was. It's not anything that's in that report.
Update on the prohibition period. So what has happened since that prohibition has been in place? During the 1 year periods, a number of challenges arose, which included judicial review proceedings being filed against court. As
council.
As part of this, an interim injunction was sought to defeat enforcement. The interim injunction was successfully defended and the High Court refused the application. A review of that decision was sought and withdrawn on the basis that existing registrations or permits awaiting renewal would not be enforced across the CBD. This excluded registrations along the prohibited lakefront. This process in itself did result in delays to enforcement generally. The council resolution created uncertainty and confusion because the prohibition was intended to be for the lakefront, not the entirety of the CBD. And the duration of the prohibition was too limited to be of any value for the long-term enforcement of the bylaw.
So could you clarify for me, by that you mean the point where it says agree that the cessation of issuing further permits for pop-up stores within the Queenstown Centre Zone commences on immediate effect? We didn't intend for it to be Queenstown Town Centre Zone, did we? We intended it, the discussion was that it be for the lakefront area. The limiting of permits, is that what you meant by that confusion point? Because I read through the papers and the discussion, and I think I watched some of it, and it was a mess. It was very confusing. And I think somehow Queenstown Town Centre got left in there for that point and not switched. Is that what you were meaning?
Can
Yes.
I ask?
Yes, thank you.
So there's a distinction there between pop-up stalls and buskers and charity street vendors in those two concepts. So I thought that the way the resolution was agreed was that there would be cessation of issue of permits for pop-up stalls, but that permits for busking and charity street collectors would carry on.
That's correct. What happened with the resolution, what that meant in practice was that by ceasing the issuance of permits for the wider CBD, that essentially applied a ban across the CBD. If you read what the words of the resolution include.
I think just to clarify, when the first resolution was drafted with the restricting 12 months on the lakefront, that didn't cascade down to the following part of the resolution, which essentially resulted in a ban of permits and registrations, anything tracked across the district, and that's not what was intended.
Yeah.
And nor was it intended to apply to buskers. I mean, it didn't apply to anybody who just simply was applying their trade within the bylaw.
My next question is, this session today is about enforcement of the bylaw itself. So, where we've got to with no permits have been issued in the last year, I guess, for pop-up stores. Also say there's only two. There should only be two that still got ongoing permits.
I think we need to take the councillors through the registration scheme at this stage, what the bylaw requires, because it's very confusing. Registrations and permits are collectively permissions. So they are what council agrees to let people trade. And the bylaw sets out the conditions for people to trade. Registration is a process, an administrative process. You don't require a permit unless you're trading outside of the conditions set in the bylaw. So that's really important to understand. So if you can't comply with conditions of the bylaw on moving regularly or staying 50 metres apart, or you want to trade outside a permitted area, then you apply for a permit. And it's really important that the distinction between the two.
Never understood that.
Does that help?
Yes, a lot. You're saying that if there is a food vendor that for health and safety reasons shouldn't be moving regularly because it causes health and safety issues, they could apply for a permit that allows them to breach the bylaw.
Well, it's not a breach of the bylaw. It's that they can't comply with conditions, so therefore they apply for a permit.
Permit that allows them to not.
Which allows council to assess their application in terms of the criteria under the bylaw. And so that's the important thing as well. It doesn't mean council is obliged to grant a permit. It just means that council has to assess the information that comes in, consider it, and then it may grant that permit.
But everyone, even if you comply with the conditions, has to register.
Yes.
Okay, so everyone
Yes.
needs to register, but not everyone needs a permit, and they're two separate processes.
So if they're registered and they turn over at the rate that they're supposed to, as per the conditions of the
Yeah.
bylaw,
Yeah.
they can operate as of right,
Yeah.
as registered. But
Yes.
if they're outside those conditions, they require a permit, which is discretionary.
Yes, exactly. Sort of like a resource consent. Think of it in resource.
New, this feels new.
So people are registered, we have a bylaw which sets out conditions, but there is no framework managing any of that.
You know, the bylaw is silent on administration.
Yeah, but and do we have a policy, so just it probably came back under the bylaw, but, or maybe the direct bylaw, but councillors agreed policy outcomes that they want to see.
Well, isn't that part of the bylaw
Yeah,
itself
well-
when the bylaw is gone through? So council, the council sets out what it thinks a statement of purpose should be, draft bylaw, what needs to be changed, and that goes through similar process to this, and then through the process of council actually making a decision on what it wants for the bylaw, and then Izzy's team enforce it. So whatever comes out the end,
Is our
whatever's
policy.
fed in, comes out the end, Izzy's team enforces.
One of the things that is felt like an issue is the number of permits that are granted against the conditions and the space available. And I just,
Yeah, there, because we're not issuing permits, or there's very few applications for permits. So people with registrations, if they comply, there should be self-management of allowance to utilise the space.
so is there any discretion to refuse a registration?
No.
No, because you sign up to complying with the rules.
So they're,
But that's the
when
bit
they,
not-
when they
So this is
register,
why we come to you a year ago to demonstrate there were a lot of people that were not moving and causing non-compliance for others.
Can we revoke registrations for non-compliant?
That's what we come to you a year ago about, was to say our next steps are quite serious and really have significant impacts and end up on the front page of the news. Effectively, seizure and prosecution is where we're at today, or we were 12 months ago. And we set a step to assist us with educating that the behaviour is so bad that we need to take some drastic action here. It's likely that we're better off working towards a prohibition of this space, because the demand is so great, particularly in the context of the non-compliance, that it's become unmanageable through the registration process. without going
With
to
respect,
serious
the question was, can we revoke an individual registration? Which
Yeah,
is
well, that's part of that.
prohibition, or not the same as a seizure.
That's part of that process.
Well, that's a compliance issue because
So,
if they're not seizure,
so revoking and seizure are hand in hand.
if they don't comply with conditions, there's a process by which you can undertake compliance, which presumably,
This is the local government act.
yeah, and then ultimately results in removal.
Do you think we have some sort of a problem with the number of registrations that we grant and with the bylaw allowing, not allowing you to have discretion to decline a registration because it's a very fixed area?
Well, we
Obviously,
have a problem with compliance with the rules, not so much the registration. I mean, it's different.
there's a compliance, there is compliance with a difficulty with compliance with the rules because there are so many registered users.
No,
There-
because they're not complying with the rules. If they're all registered and they all comply, there would be an issue.
People turn up on a day and they're registered, seek a space. If you had 30 people turning up for 7 spaces, that gets really difficult. The other side of it is if we decided to issue 7 permits, there would be no space left for anyone else who is registered. I just think there's a fundamental issue maybe with the bylaw that helps to create these problems. And at some
yeah, I
point,
don't know if it does. I remember meeting with these people. I said, it shouldn't be our job to manage who's here. That's not possible under what we, and we gave them the opportunity. We said very clearly, sort this out and make sure that the problems that having too many people there, and they have not. They're not working
so
with
my
each
question is,
other.
if it isn't working, then is there a way for us to change the bylaw? And I know that's not this discussion, but is there a way to change the bylaw so that we don't have to issue registrations to anyone who registers, that we could just issue permits based on criteria for limited spaces?
That's a matter for politicians. And
Exactly.
That's a matter for review of the bylaws.
Exactly, and I-
So that's the
Yeah.
difficulty today. What we're saying is these are the issues here. And so we need to take the council through what those issues are here, not how we fix it by other means.
The resolution that you wanted to put to us on the 19th isn't in here, I don't think. What will you be asking? it would be nice to frame the conversation going forward as in what you intend to ask us to agree
I think
or.
that Izzy has framed the conversation by saying these are the parameters of the discussion, that it's all about enforcement here. And maybe give the team an opportunity to frame up the resolution as part of the report.
Yeah, well, so.
But perhaps I wonder, just to help things along, so I think we just need, it'd be good to just go through what you want to discuss, because there are clearly what's been exposed, there are two key strands here. One is, we've got a resolution of council that we're trying to manage, and there's these teams trying to manage, and that's creating a real set of problems for us and complying with that. Then there's a subsequent conversation around where do you ultimately want to take the bylaw, because again, the ground, and I think we said this last year, the ground had shifted considerably between how the bylaw was being quite successful pre-COVID, post-COVID, the whole market shifted considerably. We've got different people in there with different expectations, which the bylaw was arguably not adequate to manage. Councillor Smith's right, if people self-managed and honoured the bylaw, it would work, but the fact that they
just not
don't means that actually our ability to enforce became constrained, and we probably need a future proof or set a new direction for that. But that's not for today, but it's a conversation for the future for you.
So just regarding, you said ultimately after these, well, as very soon, there'd only be one or two permits. So how are they distinguished from the other operators? What makes those different currently?
I understand that their registrations and what the approach was, being a sinking lid, is that each month since prohibition came in place, the number of registrations and permits have been expiring. So that therefore means that maybe 2 registrations were issued, say, in April before the council meeting.
They could re-register those ones, but the permits wouldn't necessarily.
They could register, but not for the lakefront while it's prohibited.
There's a bit of a sinking for a year.
Yeah.
How many registrations were there over Christmas, New Year's? Do you roughly know?
I wouldn't know off the top of my head.
As an active one. Yeah.
They wouldn't be able to register for the Queenstown Lakefront.
The ones that have their
Have
license
existing
already.
registrations.
Yeah. So over Christmas, New Year's, we knew it was packed there, but how many were legally operating there?
I can get those on this video after this.
It was more than significantly more.
The problem is still carried on, even with it knowing needed to comply better. I guess where we're getting to next is what was it like this summer? Which I assume you're talking to.
The table 2 in the report has the number of pop-up stalls when they expire by month.
So December's 26, is it?
26 expired.
Expired, I need to say how many's left, is that right?
What we're saying now is that there's 2.
No, at the end of April.
Then they'll be all expired.
I want to just go back to the distinction between registration and permits. And so all the traders that we've had that are complying with the separation of all that duration stable, they've all been registered, but in any of them, none of them have had permits then, I take it back. That's the distinction.
Yes, for the majority, they're operating on under registrations. And I will talk on the next slide just around how many permit applications we received during the prohibition period, and also what the nature is of what they're applying for.
So I'm a little bit confused, and I suspect I'm not the only one. Are we really clearly distinguishing between the word registration and the word permit? Because when I see, 100 in 2024, the growth is the table in the previous agenda item that talks about the number of permits issued for pop-up stalls going up 133. So are we talking about people that have been through the permit process that have had their criteria, or are we talking about registrations?
The lingo used in that April report was encompassing of registration. So it is confusing in that nature.
So because we're talking about two very different processes, registration and the bylaw, and permits are a separate thing. So it is really important that we clarify when we're talking about the number of permits that are still valid or the number of people who've got registrations, because I don't think any of us know right now what situation is, and that's not a criticism, it's language, I understand. That we go, but I think we really need to understand. Yeah.
Is it clear on the bylaw, the difference between the permits and the registration? And do we have any guidance around when you might issue a permit? Is there, have politicians given any advice, guidance for that?
What I can say is that in the bylaw, clause 10.2 prescribes the criteria in which council can consider the application. So, for example, one of them is pedestrian access. So whether or not that permit application would impact or impede pedestrian access.
And is that covered in the cumulative effect of there being multiple registrations permits issued? And the concern that was raised at the time is the commercial impact on neighbouring permanent premises offering similar services, goods or services. They're not covered. That for consideration. The cumulative impact and the commercial impact.
The cumulative impact is it's a challenging one because to process it, it's first in, first served, and right now as you will come to, there is a number of them out there at the moment. So that is something that we're trying to work through, is that cumulative impact assessment, particularly if you've got multiple people applying for the same spot as well. And as we've talked about, there is significant demand for these opportunities that exist.
I think the question is, if you had 100 applications for permits tomorrow based on the clarification that we've achieved in this workshop, how would you distinguish between them? You don't have to answer as a miracle.
The cumulative impact is very challenging. What was your second question?
With the impact on nearby businesses who offer similar goods or services.
Certainly. So it is part of the assessment of impacts of the area and those sorts of things, but it wouldn't be a financial one consideration.
Just to clarify, just to put a little full stop on that, the purpose of the bylaws is very important here. So applications need to meet the purpose of the bylaw, and that's quite discreet.
It's 10.2 criteria. In the council report, there will be, we can snip and ensure that there is some good clarity around 10.2 of the bylaw, which outlines the assessment criteria.
Thank you. There's a permit, and I'll use the deliberately the permit rather than the registration. Does that give them an overriding right to be in a certain spot, or does they still have to meet conditions? Like, can they only be in that spot if there's no one else there already who's operating, legally and all that sort of stuff?
I'd say that that is at the discretion of council, and it can impose certain terms and conditions
on a permit.
Yeah, the intention of the permit is not to turn a license to trade to a right to a spot. So it's not a de facto form of lease.
No.
And that's where I think again we've got this change that's happened post COVID. There's the change in people's expectations. This is the whole nature of this was incidental. It was to create vibrancy in life. It was to create sort of a rotation of initially starting out just with goods, then moving into food. Now it's become a significant business opportunity for people who want to be there for longer periods of time, for more extended periods of time. And that's where part of the challenge has come through, that the bylaw never really was intended to cope with that intent of activity.
I'm just mindful of the fact we've got 10 minutes or so before this session's due to end, and I think we've had a lot of confusion and we still have there. But what in particular do you need direction on today?
The purpose of today is for a briefing, so it really is to get everyone up to speed in anticipation of us returning to full council on the 19th.
Can I just ask some feedback from this summer? What was the experience from the officer's perspective in terms of enforcement or compliance and education? And then secondly, what is the option that you'll be presenting to us that gives you the most teeth to enforce and get compliance? Because you're going to give us a few options, but I'm interested in that one particularly.
I can touch on the first point around what we observed over summer. So
I'm just wondering, in the essence of time, I think we should get through the slides. You feel comfortable for us to come back to that question and sure having to answer it? I think it's worth and feedback's part of the slide set, so it might cover it all.
So update on the prohibition period, what did we see over that period of time? Despite a slight reduction in pop-up stores operating on the Queenstown lakefront, during the prohibition, council officers did observe significant non-compliance remaining. And there are two areas of non-compliance that was observed. So on one hand, we have operators down there that have existing permissions, be it a registration or a permit, and they are blatantly or have been observed to in blatant non-compliance with the 50-metre spacing and 1 hour movement rules, which in turn is affecting those who are wishing to comply with the bylaw. On the other hand, we have also observed traders operating down there with no permission under the bylaw at all. During this period, we've also received a number of permit applications from traders seeking semi-permanent occupation of council land, which I'll talk a bit more to on the next page. So between October and December 2025, council received 30 permit applications from pop-up stall holders. What we were seeing is it was for the occupation of council-owned land, and their permit applications largely requested occupation of council land from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m, so for quite long durations of time. Officers are continuing to progress through these applications to reach an outcome on those permit applications.
So can I just ask, are they applications for specific spaces or?
It
varies?
It varies. The majority of them are generally for within the permitted areas being Beach Street and the mall. But the request is to stay in the same location for the duration of the time they want to spend there, being say 10 a.m. to 6 p.m.
So they're not requesting the lakefront at the moment.
Some of them have, but as the areas are prohibited, it's not possible. Considerations. So council officers do continue to receive feedback from varying parties, and the feedback received from the different parties is quite contrary to one another. When we do present the 19th at the 19th of March full council meeting, in the council report that accompanies that, we will have a lot more information on the specific feedback from the different parties for you to read through. At a high level, feedback from traders is consistent in that they are seeking semi-permanent occupation of council land. Feedback from surrounding businesses. We have received feedback from key businesses within the CBD, Chambers of Commerce and Hospitality New Zealand, where they've expressed concern around the level of trading and the associated nuisances caused. And feedback from internal departments, parks and reserves are considering how these activities fit within existing reserve management plans and the Reserves Act, and property and infrastructure continue to raise concerns with damage to council infrastructure and obstruction to pedestrian access through these areas. Next steps. The prohibition for the Queenstown lakefront is due to expire on the 17th of April 2026. So we will be, council officers will be returning to full council and on 19th of March to seek a determination on the future of trading at the lakefront and wider CBD under the bylaw. That is the end of the presentation.
Second question. What gives you the most tea?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we will give you a range of options. From a regulatory perspective, high level, what we'd like to see is compliance. We'd like to see compliance with anything, but that's through the lens of LDC prosecution strategy. So it's through education and working with people who try and gain compliance. The current set of rules, we're at a point where for us to gain compliance, we'll take some serious action, revoking permits. As soon as we revoke permits, we'll be going into seizure and prosecution. Do we want to be prosecuting these types of matters? They're not kind of the thing that we usually would, but the impacts could be considered significant. And that's something we haven't gone through that assessment yet, but we're at that point where seizure is a more practical option. At New Year's, we were at a point where it got pretty challenging working with the traders, particularly in the context of trying to ensure that we could put on a New Year's Eve show in that space. And it was very challenging with a lot of difficulties. Then it resulted in the police and some additional council staff to really educate people to move. The majority moved, apart from a couple, but they did push back further. But it was pretty unfair that 2 chose to stay when 15 or so left. But it is a condition of permit. You cannot be there. It's very clear. People are signed up. We'll not give it to registration. The clarity of language is very important. As you touched on registration or permit, but yeah, we just couldn't. That's what we come to a year ago. Is we couldn't gain, or we're at the point where do you want to go to seizure or prosecution, or do we believe there's another step involved, which was at that time let's trial the prohibition, but with the challenge of the prohibition being 1 year and things got delayed. I wasn't comfortable for us to start. You're taking a hard line when you may choose to make it fully permitted. No registration, nothing kind of approach on the 17th.
So I think it's fair to say that part of this is about the confidence for you guys to do what the bylaw requires of it, because obviously moving forward, that's going to require a pretty hard line if we're to enforce the conditions.
That's right. And it's also ensuring that there's understanding that the capacity has not changed. So there's only 4 to 5 spaces on that waterfront area. Yet the number of people wanting to be there has increased significantly, as well as the level of non-compliance has increased significantly. So you've just got this factor that's becoming harder and harder to manage.
Ironically, this is a theme across a lot of our things, including freedom camping or whatever, is the demand exceeds the supply. And in this case, clearly greatly. And, you know, trying to achieve a level of compliance where there's, you know, a demand that exceeds by many magnitudes is incredibly hard.
Registration, so that is the question, because you did say under the current rules, it's difficult to achieve compliance. So we do have to come back to, are we part of the problem? Is our bylaw part of the problem? And if we didn't create so many registrations, there wouldn't be so many people fighting for these spaces.
Sorry, there's more nuance in that, because you can register and you can be anywhere in Reed Street, in Ballarat Street. It's the fact that they all want to be in one small section of the water.
But again, should our rules manage that?
Well, I suppose.
Or remove it completely.
Remove it completely.
Remove the opportunity completely.
And then we talk to the community about what it wants for that space, then we make our decision based on what the outcome the community wants. Then we create the rules that deliver that outcome. We don't just go, our bylaws being crap, it doesn't work, so we're going to throw it all out because it's too hard. We do.
I do want to talk to, like, I believe there is opportunity to gain compliance under the current rules, even if there wasn't a prohibition. I would need to start seizing these to set an example that you need to comply with the registrations.
But how do you? The only way you can see
it's pretty drastic.
A zero tolerance policy, effectively, where you know, you have to say if you're going to operate here, you have to do it in accordance with the rules, and there's a very limited scope for that. Now, you know, whether that's going to remove the demand is a whole different question, or whether it's just going to increase the battle, you know.
So what, in similar context, airports are doing, because there's this significant demand, particularly for licensed and semi-licensed taxis and similar transport. that they are now, so they're managing the market by saying there'll be 5 Wellington Airport, I think 5 companies can bid for the spaces.
Yeah.
Given the policy, there's only room for 5 traders essentially out there on that waterfront. So, because otherwise, Nancy, you're looking at somehow determining who you're going to prosecute, who you're not. Maybe those who are more flagrantly not applying a policy that clearly doesn't work. So the bylaw gives the council the authority to restrict areas and put restrictions in place. So is that coming back to an option to say we're going to be clearer that there would be, is it a possibility, there would be 5 places available. Anyone can apply for those and they've got to bid for that. And it could be monetary, it could be other considerations that they have less impact on the local environment, you know, a whole bunch of stuff that we could have a smarter policy within the bylaw.
But then the problem is council effectively become a landlord in managing
That's right.
a small number of places. I mean, I think that on reserve, yeah. I mean, and not saying we couldn't do that. I just don't know why we would.
There's a problem.
Well,
That might
or
be
you prohibit it completely and solve the problem.
That might need a look at the
Yeah.
Crown lease.
Yeah.
But at the moment, these aren't, the permits are not finite, correct? It could be
The
theoretically
registration.
infinite. I'm reminded of taxi medallions, whereby you bid for a taxi medallion, they're tradable. And there are rules around those. And we have a finite number of taxi medallions. We have a finite number of trading permits. And that's supply and demand.
I think that opens up a completely new can of worms. You are effectively moving from a license which invites people to participate to a lease.
Yeah.
And suddenly we would be starting to talk about not how many it's $100 to get a license.
That would end up being worth a lot of money.
No,
and look, where we've done that, and I can think of a number of examples, is that, you know, through history, there was a fixed number of slots about how many people could paraglide off Ben Lomond, for instance. Those licenses now worth hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars because there's a limited number. And I don't think that was ever the intention.
No, and I think there's a risk when you start to create a tradable product, particularly if actually the council doesn't, or the community doesn't benefit from that trade, because the trading is between the participants. There's a lot of money to be shared and made if you create a limited market. We're the community, so we don't try and create tradable markets.
Can I just ask? Oh,
Sorry, Councillor Bartlett, just want to be careful that once again, we're not expanding the parameters. We're talking about how we monitor and enforce the existing bylaw, which has a set of criteria in particular. But what we don't want to do is, it's not really the role of monitoring and enforcement to provide the community with solutions here. That they're saying they're coming to council with issues that need, where we need to control things to a degree, and they'll provide those options. But I don't think it's reasonable to get them to provide options
for the regulatory team. And look, I totally accept that, and I think that's important because, you know, and I think if we're to take a step back, if we're to take the current bylaw, our only option is to enforce it or to get rid of it, because it's clearly not working at the moment. So, and that's effectively the decision before us at the moment, is do we ignore it and have a huge amount of non-compliance, or do we knuckle it down and actually try to make it work through compliance and regulatory? Yeah,
I think, you know, when Councillor Warren himself, we went and had a quick walk around down that waterfront, and yeah, there was probably 10 traders within 50 metres. I mean, there was just
there's no level of compliance
whatsoever. And yeah, who's going to be the person who says, were you there for an hour, or did you come first, or did you come first? I mean, it is, yeah, I think it is totally unmanageable. I don't think it's manageable. I think we end up putting our regulatory team, you know, at risk when we're trying to enforce in an area where we know there's absolutely no appetite whatsoever for anyone to comply with what we've got at the moment.
Well,
that sort of concerns me.
Under the bylaw, then, can we move away from accepting registrations and go to, for that area, to a permit only space where you have to, because obviously no one can comply the number.
But I think that's the point. I'm just making those options exist to us as governance, but that's not the question before
Those
us.
schools want to be there for longer than the time period. That's one of the non-compliances. So that they need to ask for a permit under the bylaw to allow them to extend the time that they can be in the space. And there's a limited number of permits.
Well, we've got 30 permits on the table at the moment, which once again is clearly going to exceed the ability to supply them. It's not, you couldn't issue, I mean, hypothetically, I don't think you could issue 30 permits because they'd be in distinct conflict with each other. And exceed capacity by a long margin.
You still run you still, when you start to do that, you're fundamentally starting to change the relationship you're trying to have on the bylaw. Uses registration and self-policing to enable a turnover of low-grade activities. The minute you start the permit, you're giving someone an exclusive license to occupy, or you're giving them a permit, which is effectively a form of a lease. And you would have to fundamentally change the nature of the relationship. You're now giving that person exclusive rights. You have to change the financial relationship you have with those people because you're doing it at the exclusion of.
I guess the reason
You can do it if that's where you want.
I would go out for permits, obviously, for people that can't meet those.
Yes, but it doesn't. The permit is not intended to become an exclusive trading occupation. The permit is you cannot comply with some of the nature of the conditions of the simple registration. If time became the fundamental derivative, you would effectively have created a series of uses for a very exclusive number of people.
Yeah,
and that's sort of like that's the risk ultimately of that's the ultimate perversion of what the intent of the bylaw was.
And the whole reason, but the limits and the turnover and stuff was to create a certain level of equity around operating in a public space. About everyone has a certain opportunity
but even under what I'm saying though, even under a permit system, those conditions could be still applied, but for a time frame that suits a food store better than a busker. So rather than having to move every 30 minutes, they could have 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
And or a certain number, for 5 or 6.
There's a limited number of them, so it's easier to enforce on that limited number of permits.
Yes.
And when you
Councillor, that this is again what we need to make sure that whatever we take to whatever we bring to council relates to enforcement of the existing bylaw, not what alternatives there are.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm asking. Can that be done under the existing bylaw?
We even cannabis is an option, not issuing registrations. Still opens the opportunity for permits.
Well,
we can canvass potential knock-on effects, positives.
I think what Councillor
give some positives for any option for people.
I think what Councillor Bartlett, I suppose, is trying to get some framework around how do we resolve the 30 odd permits that we've got before us at the moment in a way that might help the situation, not hinder it. But I think that's incredibly challenging because you're creating exemptions to the registration rules, to the bylaw rules to enable to give additional people more rights or more either time limits or other provisions that they would otherwise be in conflict with.
So if we look at it in terms of outcomes instead of facts, in terms of what can these people deliver for the space and what do we want the space to look like, to me that there's potential in there. The only thing is that there's very limited guidance around how you distinguish between the applications. Is there a way outside of the bylaw to provide some guidance around those permit applications that you have to decide between? You're going to decide how many you issue and what the conditions are. Is there any way to provide guidance outside of the bylaw around that in terms of driving the outcomes that we want, which is a vibrant area with quality, presumably quality food outcomes, not too many of them.
So councillor, the bonus, if I just might, the bonus of a permit system is that council gets to assess the effects of that activity on the public, on equity of the use of the space, on cumulative effects of all of this. So it gets at that stage. I mean, you're dealing with natural justice issues first come, first served.
Yeah.
So the first person who puts an application in for a permit needs to be looked at. Currently, the prohibition means they can look elsewhere. We can't be granting permits down the lakefront with prohibition.
Yeah.
So when you get a permit application in, it's similar, akin to a resource consent application where the council has the ability to look through all of those issues that will impact the community, including sheeting it back to the purpose of the bylaw, which is about uses and so forth. So you don't really need something outside the bylaw. All the tools are there inside the bylaw.
All the guidance is in there
All the guidance
to
is there.
distinguish between applications.
To assist council to look at applications and assess them.
So is it, just following on from that, it might not be an answer you're able to give, but is it possible within the existing bylaw to end up with a situation where that area in green we saw earlier is not available for the pop-up stalls, but could only be reserved for X number of licenses if council so decided under the existing bylaw?
I mean, no registrations, but who else?
Yeah, sorry, permits.
Yes,
not
and you
licenses.
have the 12, it's 12.1, is 11.2, where there's a part of the bylaw that allows council to talk about restricting space or prohibiting space, which was what was imposed under the last meeting.
But it could be an outcome where generally within the CBD, if you've got your pop-up store, you've got your registration, and you're moving every hour and 50 metres back on you, but in a specific area, that's not possible. The only people that could be there would have been through a permit process.
Does it give you more leverage if you've got permits to withdraw a permit or if they're not complying with the conditions of it more than a registration?
Or to turn that permit down because it just simply can't.
They can't
You've got an
work. But if
accumulation.
you've got an existing permit holder and you're having problems with them not complying with their conditions, is it easier to revoke that than it is a registration? Yeah. I mean, so maybe that gives you more leverage, but I think once again, you've got very limited capacity for an incredibly high demand. I mean, we've currently got 30 permits on the table that are yet to be processed.
So I'm just very mindful of the time and people are here for the next item and we're already sort of 10 minutes over. We obviously need to do more work around this before it comes back or to canvass a little bit more. And I think the agenda items coming well in advance of the meeting, I think it's probably going to be absolutely key. So that councillors have some idea of staff thinking, because if we just get it the 4 or 5 days before, we'll just end up with a ton of questions at the meeting. So I think just flagging up it would be really helpful to try and bring that well in advance.
Can we take you through the bylaw as part of that report? Can we step by step the council through the ballot and but would that be helpful? That would be really helpful.
Yeah. I think the key piece to read is the last council report. Which did that. Like the environment very similar to where we were at 12 months ago.
And the numbers of visitors are only increasing. So it sounds like when the report comes back, it probably needs both an enforcement lens and a policy lens to look at. Otherwise, we're going to have to come back to this later.
Well, I think we will. I think that's what they're saying is they can't deal with the policy bit right now. So we're only dealing with the existing policies. Okay, and I don't disagree, but I think there is a broader policy question to answer.
Yeah, there is.
Okay, thank you. We'll just take a 5-minute break and then we'll be back on track.
Well done.
We should keep time, carry on. To welcome the members of the community board who are joining us, and also for this item, the next hour and a half, to run through the Wanaka Airport future study. I'm looking forward to hear how this has landed. Great. I'm sure we'll be leading on some more discussions. I'll hand over to staff to present and welcome.
Thank you very much, your worship. Lovely to see the board here. Just acknowledging chair. Thank you for coming, and thank you to everyone who's made the effort to come along and hear from Aegis today. But before we did that, I just can't help myself, and I think we just need to have a little shout out for Zoe. First Winter Games medal for New Zealand today in the big air. So I'm a big fan. So I'd like to introduce the gentleman to my right. Obviously, we went through an exercise and appointed independent aeronautical expertise. So next to me, I have Kerr Forbes. For this project, he's the executive consultant, but he's the head of aviation for Aegis Australia, New Zealand. And Jeff Anderson, who is for this project community and stakeholder consultation lead, but he's actually the advisory lead for New Zealand. And I'm happy to confirm that neither of these gentlemen reside in Paris. And did test, but they about as much as they could manage was a bonjour. Sorry to be a bit glib. There were 7 additional members of Aegis, a small army of staff in behind, and I want to acknowledge them as well because it has certainly been a very big piece of work. But now I'm going to entirely hand over to her and Jeff.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. We've got the slides that we'll use as the vehicle to summarise back the piece of work and understand there'll be questions throughout. So we'll take those as they come. We've got a good amount of time to cover up the content, so let's get stuck into it. So in terms of the purpose of the engagement, really, we understood it to be a genuine intention from QLDC to reconnect with the community and the stakeholders and the user groups of Wanaka Airport. There had been quite a number of years between now and the last master plan. And so in that time, some things had happened, but no real strategic direction had been re-looked at or retested. And we saw this as a genuine attempt as a first step towards connecting back with the community and user groups to embark on that. There have been some other context. Some of those events that had happened, there'd been CAA review of the airport stating that it needed to reach new levels of compliance, and QLDC as the airport owner has a responsibility and accountability to address that. So there was that feeding. And there was also, the High Court decision around the land ownership around Wanaka Airport and QAC. And so these events were actually starting to create a lot of interest around the airport as well. So that's, the other thing I'll say on this was the way we wanted to go about this, in terms of community engagement, was to have more than one touch point with the community. So we went for a 2-phase approach. And we felt that was important to have a bit of a plan, do review, double checking with the community to make sure that we were getting good cross-representation from the community, good involvement from the community, but we could also have some playback with the community to test what we were hearing. All right. So in terms of the numbers there, we always look for good participation because then we can say that we've really tested things with the local communities and the stakeholders and the user groups. And so we went with a multi-pronged approach where we had in-person sessions because some people still prefer to do that. But to get good reach and convenience, a lot of people are very busy in time for or not from Wanaka and want to participate. We had online access as well. So in terms of the phase 1, phase 2, that phase 1 was really about listening, asking some questions, not always related to Wanaka Airport, but to the area, the culture, what makes Wanaka special to the people that live there or visit there. And so do a lot of listening in the phase 1. We had 2 in-person venues where people come and drop in. We had an online, as I said, and we had over 2,000 people visit that online page and fill in some responses there. And that allowed us to take those results and listen to those results and then come up with scenarios that we think speak to those results that we could then play back in a phase 2 and then present back and say, this is what we think we heard. These are the scenarios we've come up with. Now we want you to give your opinion on those scenarios. And sometimes, and a couple of those scenarios were deliberately meant to be what we call the bookends, quite sort of, extreme scenarios, if you like, because we really want to test those. We think it's very important not just to understand what people or the majority of people want an airport to be in the future, but equally important what they don't want it to be. That's both those sources of information are very important for the asset owner, which is QLDC. In the second round, we had almost 5,000 people visit the online, and again, we had 2 in-person visits, events where people could come in. Similar amount of people, 90 to 100 people for that. And we had over 1,100 responses in phase 2. And we think, given the population of the area, that's quite a good reach and cut through into the community to get a good cross section of opinions and views. And throughout phase 1 and phase 2, we also had submissions from groups, and we welcome those because those groups also have memberships and can get good cut through into the communities. One of them stating that they've got over 3,000 people in their membership, so we really wanted to use that and advocate for that to get more participation. Okay, so into the results. So I want to go to the bottom right of this slide first of all, because it sort of shows the summary of the 5 scenarios, and I'll talk about those now, and then we've got a slide on each which we can jump into in a little bit more detail. But there you can see, starting from left to right, most supported scenario through to least supported scenario. With number 3 highlighted in green, scenario 3 was shown by this engagement to be the preferred scenario for the airport. That's both in person workshops and online. So good sort of alignment and support there. What is scenario 3? Well, scenario 3 is prior to Sounds Air ceasing operations. That really was what was in place. It was a GA airport which supports helicopter operations. Helicopters, we have learnt ourselves, has a very endearing history with Wanaka and helped to set it up. And there was also a scheduled service between Wanaka and Christchurch. When we were doing this work, it just so happened that Sounds Air had to cease operations, citing cost of operations and general overall cost base increases as the reason for it. But actually their demand was good. They had good ticket sales, good utilisation of the shuttle runs between Wanaka and Christchurch. And so the demand was there. It was just the cost base was making it unviable for commercial reason. So we found that incredibly interesting to happen whilst we were doing this piece of work. Option 2, or scenario 2, should I say, was to keep the airport as it is right now. Actually, in fact, just a GA airport, heavy operations, no scheduled services to any domestic town or city in New Zealand. Option 4. That was to allow for operations up to Auckland, so keeping it domestic only, but to allow for flights to Auckland, covering essentially all domestic towns and cities in New Zealand. That does require larger aircraft, which we were explicitly clear on to test that with everybody. And that came in 3rd. And then I'll call them the bookends again. So options 5 and 1 came clear sort of 4th and 5th, well, almost, sort of equal in their sort of lack of support, you could say. So option 5 is to make in the future the airport an international airport like a Queenstown airport now, and option 1 is to close the airport completely and to use that land for something else. So look, a little bit over 10% support for option 5, which is low, and it was around about 4% support. 4% support, sorry, for option 1. So again, that's really useful. The least favourable supported scenario was option 1, which was close the airport completely, and really not much. You could say not much significant support at all to make it a large airport that for international travel. Really interesting to call it out. I think I'll jump into now the slides in a bit more detail. I just wanted to actually call out a couple of last paragraphs there. What we discovered is a lot of the people that were using the Christchurch route were using that route for medical reasons and connecting with a major metropolitan centre in New Zealand for medical support that they can't receive in Wanaka, or perhaps can't receive driving to Queenstown. So that was an interesting find, and part of the demand of why that route is perhaps needed in the future, and why it's well supported for scenario 3. And we're aware that there are new types of aircraft coming in the industry. This is driven by the king KPI for the aviation industry globally, airlines and airports alike, is to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. That is driving a lot of the investment, in fact, the bulk of it, and is also driving a lot of the innovation. We're all aware that electric helicopters are actually not coming, they're here. A lot of manufacturers now are starting to prototype them. Wanaka, as I said before, has a strong history of helicopters, and so what we call VTOLs, which are like electric helicopters, vertical takeoff and landing, electric aircraft, is in the market now and will grow significantly, and moving towards autonomous as well in the future. And if they're powered by green electricity, that helps the industry move towards carbon neutrality. And there is also potential for hydrogen-powered aircraft, where, again, if they can be sourced using green hydrogen made using green energy, that could also really help the industry move towards carbon neutrality. New Zealand as a country suits really well to electric aircraft, I think. Shorter quite, sort of distances. Electric aircraft have certain distance capabilities, so they can't fly long haul, but they can fly short haul. And there is a domestic market in this country already. They're quieter, they're cleaner, they're greener. I think they could serve this country well into the future, and we know Air New Zealand are trialling them as well. So Wanaka could really benefit from receiving those types of new aircraft in the future, and this kind of innovation seemed to be a good fit for Wanaka and was resonating well with a lot of the people that we spoke to or who made submissions. So just high level results for scenario 1. You support closing Wanaka Airport. You can see there almost 1,000 no's with 45 yeses, representing about 4% support. And then when we break it down a little bit further into strongly opposed, neutral support, or strong support, again, if you add up the strongly opposed and neutrals, you get to around 1,000 people voter mark, and
for us, this is a strong signal that the general community does not support this option or scenario. Scenario 2, keep it as it is right now. GA, some helicopter activity, GA activity. That's about it. I shouldn't forget the paragliders and the hang gliders, which quite a big community. We learnt that this part of the world is very popular for that. The mountainous ranges, clear airspace, makes it really ideal for these types of recreations. And we did have good representation from that community throughout this engagement process. It's quite amazing. I learned that some of them can fly 8, 9, 10 hours a day, covering hundreds of kilometres, which is quite amazing. And so, the current configuration really supports those types of operations as well. Even though they don't obviously take off from the airport, they do use the airspace around it, and so need to be considered. So interesting here, quite even split between the yeses and the nos, and sort of our take on that is that the yeses clearly, are comfortable with how it operates today, the level of noise associated with the airport as it is today, and those types of things. It fits in with their lifestyle. The no's are likely to be majority either for option 4 or option 3. So they'll sit on the kind of the other side of option 2. And you'll see that in the results for option 3 and 4 in a minute. Yeah.
During one of the workshops, we asked that you could split down who voted for what. So this is what we did for one of our local airports, where we understood who was in that block of no, the percentages of user groups, I guess. Did you do any work on that?
There is some more detail on some of the slides further on appended to this, but there's also some more detail in the report with some more of the demographics around location of.
Could you speak to that just as you go then maybe? Just was it likely, or do you know who voted which way on which option?
High level, we can give some things. So in this session, and specifically, was you more interested in?
Well, I'm basically interested in scenario 2 and scenario 3. I think that's where the support is. It's a case of if we're having a decision, come in on March 19th, and we have to decide which scenario we're picking. It's a case of having more information about those 2 scenarios to understand.
That will be in the main report. So this is only a summary. And
yes, but I guess my point is we've got members of the community, and this is a chance to socialise the outcome. The decision will be made in Queenstown, and just as much detail as possible around those. I think those 2 scenarios would be really helpful. Just since I've got the floor for a second, when the people made their choices around these, they were at quite a high concept level. When we were talking about the economics, we had a dollar sign or $2 signs, to indicate. So just signalling that come March 19th, I would expect to see some more detailed information around the risks, around the costs, around the implications for rates, around the implications for landing fees, around, feasibility. We've talked about sound zero not working. So we can't make a decision on a scenario when they're so close without understanding who voted for what and what the consequences are. And I imagine that's why we got an airport expert to do this work. So I would expect that information to come back. Ideally, we'll get some of it today, but definitely in the report. Otherwise, to me, I couldn't decide between those 2 options because there are financial implications that are just not in front of us.
I think it's probably easiest just we can get some more detail through via the report, but we can talk to Megan about whether if there's some specific bits around 2 and 3 that you want to try and get a few more of the stats more granular, we can pull that out as well.
Yeah, I'd like a lot more detail on those 2 because basically it's a decision between option 2 and option 3, and we need to understand what we're getting into financially, and we need to understand implications for the airspace. We need to understand economic feasibility. We should not be making a decision in the local government without that information. Because if we get this bit right, it's going to help us do the master plan. It's going to go a lot smoother. If we get this bit and it's iffy, the master plan stage is going to be really, I think, fraught.
So what this is the recommendation of independent experts, and so that's their recommendation. But I think at the end, perhaps it may help just for you to think about now, is for them to actually express their rationale for why they have actually recommended scenarios.
I think so, because at this moment it looks like it's a popularity contest based on concept level scenarios. But what we want is to understand, you know, what I want the community to make an informed decision. And that's, we're supposed to give them enough information to make an informed decision, considering economics.
I'm
So
assuming the full report will be public.
Yes,
Is it already?
absolutely. No, we haven't
Is it
received
public?
it. Yeah. We are hoping to receive it this week.
And I think in terms of today's discussion, what we need to, and I'm sure Ian will speak to that, is the types of decisions that councils will be asked to make going forward. So what falls out of this report, because it's not adopt a report and give it to Paul and say, go away and implement. I'm sure it's a little bit more nuanced than that. So I think in terms of our decision making, we need to really understand what comes next. And I think that's probably behind some of the councillors' questions. And I've got a ton of questions myself, which probably relate to some of those things. So we'll grab through it. But I think, yeah, just put that framing in mind so that we're sort of, when we're hearing the information, because we all want to know what we're going to be asked to decide. We don't know what we're going to be asked to decide right now. So it'd be quite really good to close that off.
Good scenario.
Yeah.
That's what we're choosing.
Yeah, great. And look, I know you mentioned it might sound like a bit of a popularity contest, but this is a community and stakeholder engagement exercise, and we have to play back what we heard and what we just said. Where our expertise came in was shaping the scenarios that we put up based off feedback from the phase one, and also we wanted to add in, which we'll get to later in the presentation, what we call alternative options. And this is bringing what other regional airports are doing or are thinking of doing, not just in New Zealand, but in Australia and beyond, to bring that to people's attention, because the local communities may not, for example, be aware of some of those things. So we wanted to bring those to their attention so that they could potentially have a view on those things. So, yeah. So what I will say is that the no's here, you know, as I mentioned before, a common theme, the demand for the Christchurch route was quite high, and a lot of people were using that for medical reasons. And so, you know, a demographic that would have been using that route would have been people that need medical attention, specialist attention, and that's one segment of the market that was making use of that, and would have been part of those no's. So preferred option, like I said, you know, in person and online, had a clear favourable yes versus no, and again, when you added up the neutral supports and strong supports, that came through again. So I think there's not much else to cover off on this slide. We need to please. Slide 4. So this was just testing the domestic options a little bit more, domestic routes a little bit more, and quite a clear no overall coming through from the communities on that. We painted as part of this scenario the types of aircraft that would be needed to make, say, an Auckland route viable. Larger prop aircraft, ATRs, you know, 40 odd seaters, potentially there's an ATR that does 70 odd seats. And there is also a jet market that operates jets in that seat range. There is a manufacturing company called Fokkers. They make Fokker aircraft, and they have aircraft up to 120 seaters. And we knew that jets was contentious with sections of the community. So we wanted to make that really clear in this scenario. And not a huge surprise that it came through with the majority, sort of unsupport this scenario, but good to test that. And then scenario 5, make domestic and international airport at Wanaka, like Queenstown, and you can see there resounding some very, very high no's on that. So I guess that's the kind of, could be considered the sort of 101 basic airport stuff, what you use an airport for. But as I said before, airport owners and local communities are starting to use their airports for more than just airports, and using their airports to support the community more, to diversify revenue, for their airports to be more financially stable, or even break even profitable. And there are innovations coming, as I've alluded to already earlier in the presentation. So we wanted to bring some options, some complementary options, and these complementary options could be used with any of the 5 scenarios, was how we saw it. And in general, there was good support for all 4 complementary options that we had put forward. The first one was Wanaka Airport as a more prominent community asset. How can the airport and some of its land, which is undeveloped, be used to support the community in different ways, such as extending the airport services to provide wider benefits, Wanaka Airport as an emergency and medical response hub, sort of leaning on that that thread that we were finding with people using the Christchurch route as for medical reasons. Events and recreation at Wanaka Airport. Obviously, it's got the Warbirds event every 2 years, which is very popular, we understand, and well supported. Is there an interest to do more of those types of things at the airport in the future? And also additional local community involvement in the oversight of the airport. We were hearing quite a bit about the way the airport is managed, and there being some concerns with that, and there was potential themes coming through about the community wanting to be more involved. The other thing that we tested is obviously, this part of New Zealand is susceptible to emergency events, earthquakes, for example, and often airports are a resilient piece of infrastructure that can withstand those types of events, to be able to help with the recovery and the response. If roads are down for days or weeks, the airport becomes a vital link to keep the local towns going, medical supplies, food supplies, injured people being moved out for treatment, those types of things. And so we tested that, and there was real strong support for that. And upgrading the airport to be a resilient airport that can provide that service, and could potentially then have medical centres at the site that can perform some treatment as well, reducing the need to move to another location. As I said, the management of Wanaka Airport was coming up quite often. There was some distrust that we were picking up in the current management setup. So QAC have been engaged by QLDC to provide the operational management of the airport. And I think, with a long period between master plans, had created a bit of a vacuum of information, and the community was getting presented with snippets of information here and there that they were then using to fill in that vacuum and void. And it was causing real concern that QAC wanted to develop Wanaka Airport into a larger airport, bringing in larger aircraft, jet aircraft, and was causing a lot of concern. And so I think, just through that void of communication to the community, that concern was allowed to grow, and that distrust was coming through quite strong with some segments of the community. So a couple of high-level questions there that are in our results database. Are you satisfied with local representations in management at Wanaka Airport? The majority answer there was no, 43%. And would you want an additional Wanaka-based oversight for the airport? 61% majority saying yes. So that came through in the results, and could be something that is changing in the future with more community involvement. Complementary option 2, promote aero-related businesses at Wanaka Airport. There's about 250 people that work at Wanaka Airport now, so it is a good employment centre for the Upper Clutha region, and there seems to be, even for people that don't work at the airport or don't have a relative that works at the airport, general support for aviation businesses being allowed to grow and expand there. And also excellence and innovation, as I touched on, aviation focused, things like training with the mountainous terrain. It's a good training spot for pilots learning to fly in those types of conditions, and the potential to have aviation schools or accommodation for schools on site could be a business opportunity that allows some of the land to be used for. That came up, and why not? A lot of manufacturers, as I said, are making new types of aircraft, energy efficient, clean aircraft. Would Wanaka try and attract these types of manufacturers for feed testing of those aircraft? I'm sure certain manufacturers would be keen to do that, given the mountainous conditions, and the distance between towns lends itself really well to that. So this next slide is summarising complementary option 3, promoting non-aviation services or businesses at Wanaka Airport. It's quite common, even at some regional airports, to have business parks, small business parks, large business parks, or warehouses that are non-aviation focused. It provides an additional revenue stream for the airport. Land that would otherwise be, sort of paddocks, can be converted into commercial land and help cover the costs. So this is something that's happening around, and more regional airports are looking at this. More council-owned airports are looking at this type of diversification of revenue. We put that. I like to link it back to a community service if possible. I know of one example where an airport relocated from a sort of a main street that wanted to be converted into apartments and affordable housing. They had a whole row of car yards there, and the airport took those car yards, put them there, made a bit of a car yard centre. You wanted to go buy a car, you go there and look at all the different brands and pick a car, and away you go, and it cleaned up the town. So there are examples where an airport can also, they're noisy, or they've got some exposure of noise already, some sort of industrial exposure already, and putting other industrial non-aviation uses there can be a good match and a good marriage, and allow the town to be developed and keep its character in another way. So that's some examples of non-aviation uses that you can use. Some airports have put in medical facilities as well.
Just on this, looking ahead to the decision then, what we're going to be asked to decide on March 19th, are these complementary options going to be things that we're deciding on, or are they going to remain optional extras?
No, so I mean, and I can come to this at the end if you like, about what we will be bringing.
It's just really important because obviously Project Pure is in the mix. the level of excursion in this area, how much land we need for disposal, all of those sorts of things need to be.
These would all be future decisions that would fall out of a master plan, and potentially the spatial plan Gen 2. So this is just, again, the independent views of the experts.
But just flagging up, I think we need to allow a good half hour for questions. So I think we'll have a ton of questions around the table. So.
How are we doing?
Yeah, I think we can keep going. We'll rip through going a couple more slides to go. Really.
Okay.
Yeah. Solar generation at airports is becoming more and more common. A lot of airfield land around taxiways can't be used for anything other than putting some solar panels on them, and so that there's good examples around the world where airports are not only creating green energy for the airport, and we are going to get more and more electricity demand at airports, but they also supply energy, green energy to the local town as well. We had heard through our engagement that Spur that supplies power from the hydro facility to Wanaka is potentially going to reach capacity in the 2030s. We didn't validate that, but I'm just sort of replaying what we heard and diversifying the town's energy supply. Again, green energy could be a good use of the land. Okay, option 4 was around a financially self-sufficient Wanaka airport. In summary, well, first of all, I'll say it's quite common for regional airports, particularly regional airports, that are in places like Wanaka, they don't recover costs from aviation activities. The landing fees, the amount of volume that comes with passengers or aircraft landing just doesn't cover the cost. They're large assets, lots of pavement, compliance activities is very common, but it's very important to have these airports for regional connectivity. So it really does provide a service, and so often councils and ratepayers have to foot the bill for any gap. When we asked the question to the community, would you be interested in the airport trying to be financially stand up on its own 2 feet and cover its own costs? Generally, give support for that. Yeah, if it can, we should try and look at options that does that.
Just going to ask about that. So, do you think that the feedback, and I'm not trying to put words in anyone's mouth, do you think it was discrete around whether it was washing its own face or whether it was financially sustainable? Because the two are slightly different, because there might be some value to the ratepayers that it justifies subsidy, it's not subsidy, but investment. Or there, as you say, there might be alternative. But I think the point, obviously we want to get closer to recovering more revenue. We want to be sustainable, but does that necessarily mean it has to wash its face?
I think for the community to be able to answer that themselves, there needs to be more transparency on the costs, and we did hear that through the community that they just didn't really know what it was costing. They knew it was running at a loss, but they didn't know by how much and where the costs were going. So I think
it's a clearer case around the sustainable funding model rather than purely just washing its own.
Yes, yeah, and more transparency in the future. We recommend actually just to work together with the community, not try and cover up any of the finances. It can be open book, and then the community can make their own judgment call themselves. Yeah. So in conclusion, I think we've got 2 slides of conclusion and recommendations. The community was also, the first statement on the left there, through this engagement, we listened to Wanaka locals and user groups. There was a strong response from the community, which found that the most supported scenario was scenario 3, Wanaka Airport to be a general aviation airport with domestic routes, Christchurch, and or possibly Wellington. The community was also supportive of upgrading Wanaka Airport to enable civil defence and emergency services, Wanaka Airport to widen its services to include energy generation, energy storage, additional events and shows, additional investment to enable a centre of aviation excellence. This includes additional utility connections, hangars and commercial space, attract innovation through attracting future aircraft testing and demonstration. And Wanaka's got a good history there with NASA, NASA Balloon as a good reference to that. The community wants proactive management of the airport to enable their future vision for the future of Wanaka and Wanaka Airport. The community is supportive of expanding the scope of the airport to better address its own financial performance, provide additional services to the community, and continue to support current events and users. In terms of recommendations, our strong recommendation is to move from this step towards a master plan update and use the results, recommendations and conclusions from this work as a key input into that master plan so that that work can start with the ground, hitting the ground running. It's not starting from scratch, but it's really important that when doing the master plan exercise, it does also provide a really robust and thorough community and stakeholder engagement process as well. And that's really important because we think QLDC and QAC need to rebuild the trust and the relationship with the community. And there's no better way of doing that than working together with them. And the master plan process, we think, provides the perfect opportunity for that. We would also recommend that master plans be updated every 5 to 7 years for regional airports because sentiment can change, aviation can change, innovations are bringing new things, and you've got to retest what the people are wanting from their airport and what aviation is presenting the airport could be in the future, and keep retesting that. So, so not to leave a long distance between master plans, which, as we've seen, can create some vacuums and cause issues.
Is there once again, is there a sort of a balance to that, to saying, well, how do we find that balance between having long-term certainty about where we're going versus adapting to change? I mean, if you look at like land use planning, for instance, one of the reasons we want certainty around the airport is so we can understand what's a good place to put residential development or avoid conflicts, abuse, or which clearly has been reflected by the community over time around where the noise is impacted and things like that. So how do you get that balance between long-term certainty and renewing the planning cycle?
The 30-year master plan?
Yeah, so typically master plans will have up to a 20-year look ahead, and then if the airport can, an ultimate view, which may go beyond the 20 years. Sometimes the 20 years is the ultimate, like that. This is all we can do with this airport. We've run out of land. There's no more we can do, and that's that. But typically, a nice complete story that a master plan can tell is, this is what we think the airport should be in plus 5 years. This is what we think it should be in plus 20, and this is what we think it could be ultimately. And then you're really painting the overall picture. At a point in time, this is where we think things could head, based on community involvement, stakeholder involvement, user group involvement, airline involvement.
So you're still looking to that longer term, but you're recasting the vision each time.
You're just recasting it.
Yeah.
Look better. So if a master plan was done in 2026, 7, you do another one in 5, 7 years, and another one in 5, 7 years, and you're always doing that 5, 20 ultimate look ahead. Around the management, QAC, our recommendation is QAC needs to be on board with what our recommendations are suggesting that the people and the stakeholders want, which is scenario 3, and whatever master plan process would unearth as well. So we think that's important to call it out, because if they can come out and say, yeah, we're on board with that, as the entity that's been brought in to manage the operations, we're on board with that and we'll help deliver that. And QLDC are saying the same thing. That's really important for the communities to hear, and the stakeholder and user groups to hear. And that's important because that trust does need to be rebuilt. And then the communities will say, okay, well, they're actually saying what we're wanting, and there's alignment there again. If that can happen.
Can I just pick up on that, Kev? You're quite overt in the recommendations around QAC, and I understand there's a strong relationship between QAC and QRDC because of the shareholding, etc. I'm wondering why you didn't broaden that out to saying it should be led by an airport operator, and why it was quite specifically on 2 separate occasions the recommendations QAC.
Yeah.
Was it deliberate or was that subconscious?
No, it was deliberate. I mean, yes, it should be not. Wanaka Airport can benefit from having an airport operator who's managing a bigger airport, help them with their needs, because often you don't have the local expertise to, do the compliance, CAA requirements and upgrades and all those things, or attract airlines again, QAC makes sense because it's local, it understands the local context. It's got people here an hour and 15 minutes away that can come and assist. There's an efficiency there. They're the current incumbent. So we were looking at, is there a burning bridge here? Is there a reason why QAC shouldn't play that role? And we don't think that's the case. We actually think they can play that role if it's a positive role. First, they've got to rebuild. They're part of that trust rebuild first. That's a prerequisite, if you like.
So that question asked of people that respond to the survey.
When we started the work, we had no idea of the types of sentiment in the community. These were discoveries, really, but we had to pursue them because they were coming through quite strong. So we looked at it from that context, Simon. And so, do we think you need to, is QAC doing something wrong? Do they need to be moved out? No, I don't think so. I think they can be part of the recommendations. They could help with their role in a master plan process. But they've got to rebuild QRDC and QAC have got to rebuild the trust with members of the community. And if they can do that, then you can get the benefits of having an airport operator like QAC help with the difficult stuff, attracting airlines again. How do we get a route to Christchurch again? QAC could help with that. Getting the compliance issues addressed, QAC could help with that. Doing a thorough master plan process, they could help with that. And there's good examples of that.
Is there a natural tension between QAC operating Queenstown Airport and Wanaka? Do you see? I know you're suggesting there is knowledge, absolutely. There's great people that work there. We all understand that. But there is a natural tension as well with boundary GA being moved out, air noise boundaries. That could it be seen from a different thing that having an operator there is difficult to separate their shareholder drivers on their airport?
Yeah, with a vacuum of information about what Wanaka Airport will be used for, yes. That's why a master plan is important to remove that vacuum. And if QAC, as I said at the start, if QAC are on board with that, and they have to be on board with that, otherwise they should walk away. If they don't agree with that direction of scenario 3, for example, then they probably themselves should walk away and say, well, we don't agree with that. We shouldn't be involved anymore. And then QRDC will need to look for another airport operator.
So one of the previous consultations, they rightly or wrongly referred to it as 2 airports, 1 district. Now that was a bit of a flashpoint because of the cause and effect of the decisions associated, which I think the chair just sort of highlighted. I suppose that this consultation didn't consult on the 2 airports, 1 district model. It focused specifically on Wanaka Airport. So I suppose, is it premature to jump to that conclusion, I think is what they're asking.
I can see that this could turn into quite a big discussion, and I just want to reinforce again that this is Aegis's recommendation. They saw the benefit of working with QAC, but your question is there an option to bring in another aviation expert, an alternative to QAC? There are always options, and it may be that this community would want to see, or this council might want to demonstrate that we're actually testing those options. I can see that, and I'll go through and seek your direction on what we are going to consider in March. but it really does come down to considering, obviously the Aegis's report and then their recommendation to support scenario 3. And that's a decision that you're going to need to make if you can. And then obviously falling out of that decision. And I think one further recommendation in that report in March might be that we report back on options to deliver a master plan. Now, I haven't seen the final report yet, and we might want to add in there something about looking at the future management agreement of Wānaka Airport. So those are still balls in the air, frankly, but I think there's clearly a need to bring back a further report, because you're going to want a lot more detail around the options of delivering a master plan in close consultation with your community. And I do want to say that we thought this was almost mission impossible for Wākatipu when we actually did do a master plan piece with QAC, and it was highly contentious. It was, there was a lot of concern, but we did it, or should I say QAC managed to do a master plan with the community, in consultation with the community, and this council, previous council, got to endorse that piece of work, and it has gone well, and the community felt heard. And that is just, even though it's an example that includes QAC, it is an example of where that can be done very successfully, and we can do that again. But I think there are options you will want to work through around what that looks like, and so that's answering your question, Your Worship, and also bringing in the desirabilities that this report has thrown up, such as financial viability, such as events, critical infrastructure, and excellence and innovation, and those elements as well. So that's more than we can do in the March meeting.
I just would point out that was the second attempt at it, and clearly didn't get it right the first time. But just want.
No, that's fair.
Sorry.
That conversation one step.
Well, what I'd actually like to do is really move to some questions, because I think some of the questions that we've got to ask will probably give you a really good, really good indication of what we would like staff to come back to. And what I'd like to do is start with Chris over there, and we'll work around the table with a couple of questions. And if you don't have any questions, you can give them to somebody else. So but I think we'll work around, and hopefully by the time we get around here, most of them have been answered. Chris.
As of right now, I don't have any burning questions, that I don't think that the next follow-up is going to actually cover, but I know Cody's definitely got one.
I just first want to commend you on the work. I think this is a masterclass in engagement and consultation, and it gives me an enormous amount of confidence moving forward. So thank you so much. I think you've found a natural bell curve on where it is, and it's the questions that, seem extreme, but really captures the whole thing. So I wanted to recognise that and share the appreciation for how you phrased it and enjoy it. For me, scenario 3 obviously includes reintroducing domestic travel, given the nuance of Sounds Air and there not being a demand problem. Would you say that that's down to the size of the plane, the amount of passengers in terms of the costs being too prohibitive, or was it, if you could share any sort of insight that would help?
Yeah, potentially, because it was a 9-seater doing, 6 runs a day type sort of setup. So the commercial viability could have been slightly better with slightly bigger aircraft. There is a shortage in New Zealand of 10 to 30 seat aircraft, and they are globally available. It's just, I know it's hard to attract those types of aircraft or airlines to New Zealand, given the size of our domestic market here. And there is a broader, you take a step back, there is a broader piece here with, the New Zealand government about how they can foster and encourage regional domestic travel. What can they do to support that and underpin that? Through my association with the New Zealand Airport Association, we are actually trying to have those conversations at a higher level about, how do we fix, not just Wanaka, how do we fix regional connectivity for New Zealand, full stop. So there are some bigger things at play, I just pointed out. If we can get slightly bigger aircraft here, you know, not too big, you know, still up to that sort of 30-seater mark. Because if you go above 30 seats, it starts to trigger more compliance with the CAA, which is then more cost for the airport. So it's quite a nice little sweet spot there. That cost base could then be more efficient and less flights a day, but you know, fitting in the same amount of demand could lend itself. And then there's a new type of aircraft, which is, you know, can be a real disruptor. Yeah, it's a bit like when Uber came. You know, it could really disrupt the market, provide the community something different, and they go, yeah, I actually like that. I'm happy to sit on a 5-seater electrical helicopter, and it gets me there pretty good in time. Fares are really good. You know, so there is the new stuff. When we get that service up and running again, we don't know. Is it going to be 1 year or 5 years or somewhere in between? We don't know. So the types of aircraft that get thrown onto that route will depend as well on the timeline.
Yeah. Those are my questions. Just to make a closing statement, given the sentiment in the room, I think that in terms of relationships and other stuff, there's also, I get the sensitivity, there's also a concern with speed. We have to be able to move on this stuff. Most of the time, being too afraid to act or to move forward because of, you know, past things is also a problem as well. So, yeah, and to commend, I appreciate this gives me confidence to move forward with that pace in order to give certainty to all users of where we're going from here and to just keep the process moving.
I have got a couple of actually a lot of questions, so I'll try and keep it to a couple. In your conclusion, you've written domestic routes to Christchurch and or Wellington. Did you get specific that Wellington was the preference? Because that's how it reads in that, because otherwise I would say it should say Wellington and or Christchurch, as in Christchurch would be the most important, and if you could add on.
Christchurch was strongly favoured.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect. So when we read that, it actually looks like Wellington was the most important.
And Christchurch has got great connectivity to the rest of New
Yes,
Zealand.
and that would have been my assumption, so I just wanted to check that.
It was.
Okay, so Christchurch #1, Wellington bonus.
Yeah, bonus.
Okay.
Yeah. The only reason we put Wellington in, and that came from us, by the way, it wasn't really coming from the community, was to get you to the North Island.
Yes.
So if you wanted to avoid the ferry crossing, which can be temperamental with winds and, you know, and you just wanted to avoid that, de-risk it, would you like a flight from Wanaka to
Perfect, but just when I read that, it was the almost favouring Wellington, which I didn't think would be the case, so I just wanted to clarify that. Second question, and this might be more a question for our staff in terms of information for the report, is what is the current cost of the average QLDC ratepayer and what rate does it fall under? You might not be able to answer it today, but I think it's really important for us to know, for everyone to know, but I just think, yeah, what rate does it come under? What does it cost everyone?
Sorry, to add to that, can you please, it would be really helpful. You can take that question. You can take questions.
Okay. And I just had, this is kind of a connected, I know I only said 2 questions, but this is 2.B. So, because you made a really good comment around when airports like this are typically funded by, you know, help funded by rates, and I totally understand that. And it's when you don't have good regional connectivity, but at the moment it's not providing regional connectivity. So I guess that's just part of it. That may be more of a statement.
Yeah, it's not that the people are saying it should.
Yeah.
So we just need to get it back to that point.
Yeah.
It is making some revenue from the GA activity, for example. You know, there is landing charges, no passenger charges, obviously, but there is landing charges. So there is some revenue coming through from that. It's nowhere near enough to cover.
Yeah, no, I was definitely aware of that, and I kind of like the point that you could say there could be reasons for some ratepayer funding if it was providing some regional connectivity.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
thank you.
Thank you. Just wondering in the report what sort of level of financial information we might have on future costs for all the options, well, specifically option 2 and 3, because while option 2 is sort of stay as it is, it's still going to cost more in the future, isn't it? So if we are being asked to make some decisions on which option we go forward with, it'd be helpful just to have even an indication of what sort of costs we might incur. And I'm conscious that in this consultation process, it's a bit like selling a car and showing all the bells and whistles, but not telling them what the price tag is.
Yeah,
So
fair. We do have a section in the report which is a full dedication to cost benefit with each scenario and a cost benefit analysis, and that allows you to see those financial metrics for each scenario, and then also how each scenario performs financially against each other.
How do you get a reason?
There is a lot of obviously assumption, and it has to be at a certain level given the level of detail we've got on the scenarios and where we're at. So
it's very ballpark stuff. There's a lot of nuance, obviously.
Yeah, but both option 2 and 3, and I guess one of the reasons why they're quite popular, do involve, well, whilst the additional complementary options will involve little investment and return on investment potentially, the core scenario, they don't involve runway upgrades or terminal upgrades or anything, which is why they were probably quite popular, because they don't involve huge capital spends in the short term to create the same level of aviation activity as in it. Whereas if you're in, say, scenario 4, it would be a large upfront investment.
A lot more capex with scenario 4.
Yeah. So the investment around some of those other ones is more around what else could you do with the airfield, which would come through the master plan process, and depending on what those complementary options may look like, there'd obviously be a level of investment and return on that, which you'd have to weigh up.
So I'm just following on from the same question. So the report, the full report does talk about what the actual upgrades are needed for the purposes of option 3.
Yeah, it will
and some costings around that. So it actually gives them
pretty limited
details
to
of what
option 3 because option 3 was in effect operating as it was 12 months ago.
But to answer your question, yes, the report will highlight, these are the things that need to be upgraded. So for example, option 4, it needs a terminal upgrade. You need a terminal upgrade for that. You need a runway upgrade. There's investment required. The quantum of that investment is ballpark this much. What benefit do you get from that? Because there are some economic benefits from that. Well, the economic benefits are this, and then we've worked out some cost benefit and ratios for comparable.
I guess what I'm more probably interested in is if we wanted to go with scenario 3, which is really trying to get those aircraft back in, what do we actually have to do or spend on the airport to be able to make that happen?
Yeah,
we can't just wave a magic wand and convince the airlines to start running that plane. So what do we actually have to do to make it more attractive to them to be there? And that was one of my other questions, was around, what was the big costs for Sounds Air? Was it landing fees? Was it staff charges?
The big one was the engine. Actually, it was with their fleet, and it was the engine replacements.
Right.
Had gone up to. I read the article in the newspaper. I think it was $500,000 New Zealand dollars,
which is entirely out of our control.
That's
where I'm getting to.
They did
what can we control to make option 3 happen if that's what we decide to do.
They did cite CAA fee increases as well, but that was a lesser contributor. It's really around the aircraft maintenance was the heavy hitter.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I suppose there's some encouragement that the scenario 3 really does reflect what, and confirm what I probably thought the community might think. So there's probably no more surprises there in that respect. But yeah, I think there are some other pieces of the puzzle that we'll still need to work through. And as you correctly identified, that trust remains a challenge here, both from an operational perspective and from a planning perspective. So how we move forward from this point becomes really important. Just commenting, you talked a little bit about Auckland, Wellington, whatever. I think we've got a little bit focused on the locations, but I don't think that's the driver. It is to Christchurch to a degree, but the connectivity is the driver. And the type of aircraft and the impact on the community is the driver. If we could have Sounds Air type aircraft that would get us to Auckland in an hour, people would embrace it. I've got absolutely no question of that. But that's not the driver. It's can it be done without having those broader impacts? So I just wanted to highlight that. Encouraged to see the
other airspace users acknowledged in there, because I think that's something that's been really missed in the past. And that what we do here doesn't just affect the airport site, it has effect on the whole basin, it has effect on a whole range of legitimate users. So that's really encouraging. I don't think it's really clear what the outcomes of the 139 and the airspace implications are from this scenario as well, because we've been moving very rapidly down we must achieve 139 certification, we must achieve do these things. But I've also heard through the process from your own advisors and stuff that that's not necessarily the case, that we don't necessarily need full certification, or we don't necessarily need to have an MBZ, or so just wanting some clarity around that, around the implications of that. And yeah, I mean, I just the master plan, as I said, becomes a really key part of this, and I think the community will be looking towards some assurance that they've got a real key part of that, and that council remain the decision makers following that, or the community have a role in that decision making, the democratic process. It's not just we hit land here and it gets cast to future. And to be fair, that's where we ran into some challenges in the past, that it was assumed there was a long enough leash to do whatever required to achieve that, and that didn't align with community expectations. So
I have so many questions that I'll just limit them to two very small ones. One is, well, just a query to get a pro forma income statement under scenario 3, what you think that would look like. And then the second one, and it's a strange one, is alternative aircraft. I see that as accidentally a wonderful thing for the airport and for the community, and it would draw people here just like Warbirds does. But have you costed that out? Are there any comps globally? What does the scenario look like?
In terms of, so we haven't actually approached any aircraft manufacturers to test that with them. That would be, we need to, I think that would be a subsequent thing that QRBC would need to do in the future. We just know that we see a good marriage there. We think it's something that should be pursued proactively rather than reactively. And we would recommend in this report that QRDC actually go after that and really test it with those types of manufacturers, like the airport did do with NASA all those years ago. The airport pursued it. In fact, the gentleman who had a big role to play in that is in this room today, and that's proactive, right? Took the airport. And I think QRDC should be proactive with their airport on new types of aircraft. It's a good marriage. Go after it. You might get some interest.
I don't want to use the word aspirational because that's a put down, but at this point, it is an aspiration.
Yeah, opportunity. Yeah, and in my opinion, it was received well in the engagement. I think the community is generally on board with that. Pursuing that type of innovation of new aircraft, it just lines up with a lot of not just Wanaka, but New Zealand's aspirations in terms of green, use of technology, carbon neutrality. So why wouldn't we go after that from Wanaka Airport? We should. It's an imperative, natural fact. That's why we're putting in the report to do that.
Right. I think sure. Yeah. I've got. I've probably got lots of questions on my mind, but that's a politician.
There we go. Thanks. Thanks for the report. Great to see it. Look forward to waiting the detail, and just throwing out a point to staff, which maybe you might reply to. I'm sure there'll be far more questions, not only from councillors, but from our wider community that fall out, not necessarily responses or submissions, but questions or clarification of what was meant by. So it'd be really good to think about a process as to how that can be accommodated, ask a question, get an answer, and I'm sure, anyway, just flagging it up. The report very much talks about in terms of what we heard from our community, but noting that 40% of the respondents actually don't live in the district. So does that change things in terms of what is the community, or what? I mean, if you stripped all of those out, would the results be significantly different?
I think Niels can possibly tell he's on one with us, but I'm pretty sure that was pretty much retrospective. If you pulled out that, the percentages were pretty similar, but we'll make sure that we go through that process and include a slide on that for consumption.
Well, you speak to bits of the questions that Albert asked earlier.
Do we know if that 40%, if they're actually, they might be out of town, but are they actually right?
The question we had was, where are you based? So yeah, you're right. Some of those maybe we'd have to have a look and see what. I think it was pretty much the same percentages either way.
Yeah.
Oh, sure, just a question.
I can clarify on that one. So on the locations, we asked a few things, and it was where people live, if they're users, if they're frequent users, residents and ratepayers, or just airspace users.
That detail will be in the final report, will it?
Yeah, there's a breakdown of that, but in terms of how that, we'll have to have a look and see how if that influenced or changed the percentages across the scenarios. But that's pretty.
Then just following from the comment that Deputy Mayor made, I don't think we've heard the answer. I'm still not sure the answer. At what level of activity out of the airport do we preclude paragliders and gliders from being operating around this area on the ranges? I think because I've heard it alluded to, I haven't heard a clear definition. I haven't heard an answer or what the rules either require or don't require. So it'd be really good if somebody could speak to that.
It's really around scenario 3 to 4. So scenario 3 is pretty similar to what's exactly what they had 12 months ago, which still retains a free airspace. If you went to scenario 4, there would have to be some looks at the changes in rules around airspace and everything. So
the CAA have obviously they made recommendation about ground use of the site, which has been worked through on organising helicopters and aircraft at different parts, fencing and things like that. They did make some recommendations about airspace, but they were sort of on hold until this exercise had sort of landed.
Yeah.
So is there a danger that with scenario 3, CAA come in and say, well, actually now we're going to require controlled airspace?
Yeah, so I'll try and represent that group hopefully accurately. From a technical perspective, to go from scenario 3 to scenario 4 will require some changes to the airspace classification. And that will, because you're bringing larger aircraft, more precise routes for the safety of those aircraft, the airspace needs to be controlled more. That puts some more restrictions on the open airspace users like the GA aircraft and the paragliders and hang gliders. So for them, that's an impact. With scenario 3, it's a scenario that they've actually, that's their default, that's their base scenario, that's what they've been used to, and they want to keep that, they want to preserve that. So scenario 3 just so happens to be a level of what they're used to, and gives them an airspace, freeness that they're used to and are happy with, which is pretty much free.
I just speak to that a little bit. We've already been told though previously that there isn't a status quo option around certification, and so that's the bit we don't really, as I said, we don't really understand. It's not really clear whether we're still going down the pathway of a qualifying airport. We hadn't had the Part B evaluation completed, and once again, as I said, your advisor, I apologise, I can't recall.
Mike Haynes?
Yeah, Mike Haynes, who was helpful during the process. He wasn't of the view that it required an MPZ and wasn't of the view that it required even necessarily qualifying, certainly not certification. So it's unclear about that because, as I said, we've previously been told there is no status quo.
So I was clarified with Roger, Director of Property, and Roger's clarified that CAA specifications relate to the ground, not the airspace. So it would be.
I'm not sure that's entirely
correct. But anyway, we've got a 139. Yeah, but we've got a 139 for Part A. We haven't
qualifying, not certified.
Yeah, qualifying. But I think what I'm hearing, this is something that council can continue to test, is if at what point does, if we're talking about scenario 3, at what point does scenario 3 then trigger the next step in the part B and the airspace management? And that can be a defining factor for how the council ultimately wants to make a decision. So that's, but I think what I'm hearing said is that the minute you go to 4, there's a no fault option. You will be fully qualifying. Might be about how far you stretch 3 that could judge that.
And that can be made very clear in
Those decisions, while they're impacted by the undirecting, they will be impacted by the master plan, they will be impacted by the strategic plan if we're to take the model that we're taking in Queenstown. So that doesn't automatically mean that you make that investment to jump to that next level. That's another decision to make down the track, but it is something we need to be alive to. For sure.
It sounds like it's part of the risk in the report, because there's a difference between scenario 2 and 3 around the time.
Sorry, just and I want to continue on. Have we got?
So I think what we're saying is that if there is a risk under scenario 3 that airspace may be affected, yes or no, that might influence your decision around.
I think it's something that we'd pick up through the master plan, to be clear.
We have professional advice from the airspace, David Baines.
We will check with him again as to really specifically
or a recommendation attached to this saying for scenario 3, this is what he sees as the.
I think it's really, really important to our community that we have that. Last question before I move on, and again, it's maybe a sort of more of a land use planning. In our spatial planning and our growth, all other things being equal, that land between sort of Wanaka and Leggett coming in houses, if you look at what's happened over the last 20 years. So at what point does housing constrain the airport, and at what point does the airport constrain housing? Because that's the tension we've had over the hill. And I think it would just be really good to settle that beforehand, because otherwise we'll just get that tension. So how do we get the zoning in place? What happens when a fast track comes in for a couple of hundred houses or a couple of thousand houses on the paddock next door, and all our plans are out the window. So just from a land use planning, and I think we really need to make sure that regardless of what we end up with a master plan for the airport, there's no point having that if it's constantly threatened or undermined by what can happen around it. But that's outside this report. But I think the council as an organisation, we need to have a plan for how we manage that tension.
So sound like a broken record, but the master plan will have a dedicated chapter on land use, and it's guided by, typically for airports, noise contours. So and this is where the planning authority can then use that master plan to then appropriately zone around the airport for non-airport land, what land can be used for. And so you might then look at the noise contours and go, well, underneath the flight path, out to a certain distance, really, we should only use that land for industrial. And then beyond that noise contour, then we can start looking at housing. But adjacent to the runway, where the noise contours are more favourable, we might be able to bring housing a bit closer. So the master plan will give the key inputs for then the planning authority to then appropriately zone around the airport.
Interrupting. Once again, we've got a slight problem in that there's a misalignment between the current air noise boundaries, the scenario that we're approving, and potentially where the master plan is taking us as well. So we're going to have to bring those things back into alignment. There is a set of noise boundaries. They don't align with anything that they're talking about in terms of this scenario currently.
And when you do the master plan process, when you there is a consultation phase where you actually, as the airport owner, you go out to the community and say, here are the contours that we have developed. This is, you put all that on the table. It's all part of the consult, and allows the community to come back and comment on that, object to it or support it, so that the communities are making better informed decisions about.
I suppose my point being is we can't make assumptions about land use based on the current noise boundaries because they don't align.
Cool. That's some.
Thank you. The community board have been asking for this report or this piece of work for a couple of years. So again, very grateful that it's happened. Very grateful for the way you worked with us as an advisory group and ISMIS as well. We tested you on a few things and you tweaked and were responsive. So thank you for that. I think it's worthwhile noting that this in itself wasn't the end game. This was always a foundational input into getting clarity as to what the strategic direction is for the next 30 odd years for a very important district-wide asset, but an asset that happens to be based in Upper Clutha and is very important to us. So I just don't want to lose sight that this is just not the end game. It's a foundational piece. I had one question before, so I'll ask one other question. I'm conscious this scenario 3, we expect maybe airlines to be knocking on our door just because we've suddenly said that we're open for business, and we know that's not the case. So can you just give us a reality check as to the pros and cons as to why an airline would decide to resume scheduled flights here out of Wanaka?
Part of a broader issue in New Zealand, as I spoke to, at the moment, regional connectivity is at an all-time low. There are some small players like Sounds Air, but really New Zealand has got a stronger market share than it's ever had regionally. And unfortunately, what that means is they're using they're putting their aircraft on the routes that are most commercially viable for them. So they get to pick and choose at the moment. So what we need in New Zealand is more competition. We need some government assistance with that. We're having actually conversations, as I said before, at that level to try and address it there, because that's really where we're going to get most traction. You know, QLDC and other councils are not going to have an influence on Air New Zealand. QLDC and other councils are not going to improve the cost base for the small players. Really, that's more at a higher government level. So I think we need to start there, get it fixed there, and then places like Wanaka will benefit from that. As we said before, though, where Wanaka could get a head start on their other regional airport competitors is chasing the innovative, new aircraft and trying to snag them first in terms of coming here, or potentially in New Zealand, which Air New Zealand are trialing. So why don't you come and trial down here in Wanaka, open air space? Great place for you to do that. So that's, I guess, I'd say that's in QLDC's gift to pursue that. But attracting doing things the normal way, which is trying to go out, beat the drum, come fly here, it's a band-aid fix, right? And that's not a Wanaka problem to fix. That's an New Zealand government problem to fix.
We're happy to be the guinea pigs for these new innovative airlines. So,
I'll be really quick because I know it's actually time now. I think it's kind of interesting that we landed on where we were anyway. Not that inspiring, but so I kind of worry that the lack of trust and transparency that people are feeling kind of just made us made the community choose that option in a way. So I guess I'm just hoping that when we do the master plan, however we do it so that people can feel a bit more inspired, that we're not going to, we don't just land back where we were.
Couple of questions. One is sort of at least along the lines of what Mike raised, which is the scope of scenario 3. And I think it's going to be important how we define it. Your big heading with domestic routes to Christchurch and to Wellington is one thing. The byline underneath it, which is do you support turboprops, and keeping general aviation as is another. So need to make sure we don't revert to the big block heading and make sure we define it really clearly. I think we need to have some limits around runway length and number of passengers, because we could bleed into scenario 4 in the attempt to bring in those airlines. And I think it's really important for the community that there's a stop. So if we can't meet scenario 3 within certain limits, we're able to bounce back to scenario 2, that it doesn't become that we have to achieve these routes at any costs.
And that's where your master plan will come in, Nikki.
Well, I think the master plan is important, but I think we get locked into a scenario when we make that decision. It can be really hard to reverse that. We need to know when we make this decision what the hard limits are of scenario 3, so that it doesn't push into 4 and we don't have these other consequences. So if you could put that sort of size of plane, length of runway stuff in there as a hard stop, that would be great. The other question I have is around governance, because we've talked about management, we've talked about QAC, but obviously the issues that we've had in the past were around governance and ownership. So I know the bigger we get, the more complicated the airspace, the more issues there are as a PCBO, more pressure on our general managers in the hot seat. So why do we not look at governance? And maybe a better question is, do you see any difference in the ease of governance for a council between scenario 2 and scenario 3? And thinking of the far end of scenario 3, where you might have bigger planes and more of them.
Well, I think the answer is sorry, and sorry to butt in.
No, and I know it's not necessarily for them, it might be for us as well, but these are, for a second, these are airport experts that understand airport management and governance. So if they have any insights into that would be great, because we didn't canvass governance through this process.
Well, I will just say one thing and then I'll then continue, but that's exactly the reason why we have a council controlled trading organisation running ZQN. You know, they are the airport aeronautical experts. So they are accountable for the board is accountable for the safety of Queenstown Airport.
Exactly, which is why I'm asking the question, because through this process, the different scenarios have different levels of risk potentially in that space, but we haven't talked about whether we're going to require a change to the governance structure.
That would be
I'll tell you and we've given our recommendation. We don't believe there needs to be a management change or a governance change with our recommendations on the way forward. We think as long as the trust is rebuilt, it can stay as it is. The common practice in this part of the world, whether it's in the Pacific, Australia, or New Zealand, is if you can bundle regional airports under the management of a large airport nearby, good. Because the regional airports don't have the expertise. Why wouldn't you use the expertise from the local big airport to help with the difficult stuff? Because regional airports typically are council-owned, council-run, and that's not what airport councils are good for. They don't have that, that airport management team in their structure, and so actually it's not putting aces in their places. I'll give you an example. Fiji, Nadi Airport is run by Fiji Airports Corporation, which also runs 14 other airports in Fiji on regional islands. Melbourne Airport also runs Launceston Airport. There's lots of examples where you have that big sibling, little sibling relationship, and actually there's a lot of positive in doing.
Right, so it's pros and cons to having QAC in the management. This would be one of the positives that might mean that, okay.
Yes.
Sure. Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Just reflecting on that, as long as there's sufficient local voice in that engagement.
So we have recommended.
Yeah, cool. I get the economies of that, and actually the way that you presented this, going back to what Cody was saying earlier, is you brought more than just carrying out a survey very effectively and professionally, but you've done it in the context of understanding where this all needs to go to next in the big context. So well done with that. I feel like saying something positive in French, but I won't.
We wouldn't understand.
No, neither would I. But question-wise, going back to I think what perhaps John was talking about, and others would allude to it, was there opportunity for engagement with other regional or national or even any other potential operators through this process, or is that separate? And I'm not talking about trying to market it, but just having a conversation.
We actually have, through other channels and other engagements, relationships with other regional airports in New Zealand. So in the background, we were, using that to our advantage in this this piece of work. So whilst we didn't officially go to those airports and survey them or ask them about some certain questions, we had some intel on that, as well as Australia too.
Hopefully do more of that in the future. Qualitatively, where do you think the concern about Auckland being option 4 being part of the mix? Was it because the view that there would need to be large aircraft, so there more investment, or is there just an us and them thing between here and Auckland that I'm not quite aware of?
Option 4 is quite a big step on investment on the ground, but then also size of the aircraft. So lots of the things for over tourism, more people coming, big investment for the capital infrastructure. That's probably the.
Thank you. Because the reason I ask is that because quarter of my day job is in Wellington. Quite often, unless I plan my life well, which I probably should be better, I will have to fly via Auckland to get to Wellington anyway. on the same plane. You know, so something could be, it's funny you say one thing, but it can actually be something else.
Yeah, two words that option 4 was not supported for was over tourism and jets.
Oh, so it was over tourism. Thank you. I'll leave it there. Thanks, John.
Kia ora team, thanks very much for that. For the purpose of understanding the engagement process and also thinking ahead to the master plan engagement, based on your experience elsewhere, how would you evaluate the participation levels in this engagement exercise? That's one question. And my second one is there anything that you would have done differently, or if you had a phase 3 engagement stage that you would do, that you would be asking or wanting to explore?
We haven't got any money yet.
The question. I think the engagement was a good level of engagement, and the stats showed that. So
I guess that's what I'm sort of, because the stats are there. I guess I'm trying to understand those stats in context.
Compared to
that's pretty good. The second round was a pretty good level of engagement, particularly the online one. The in-person ones, there's always an argument. You always want to get more, and there's always, could we have advertised earlier? Could we have had bigger facility? There's always things you could do, and we tried to improve from round 1 to round 2 to make sure it was more widely accessible. And if we did another round, we'd try and do the same, obviously, again, to try and make sure it's accessible as possible. But there's always a balance between just the practicalities of how much time we can commit to one of these sorts of processes, how long you can have it open for, deadlines and all that sort of stuff. But I think generally it was a pretty good level of engagement. Which, to get over 1,000 responses for the second round was really positive.
And stage 3 is the master plan. There's no need to do any more now. This is a good step 1. And some saying it's never meant to be the end game. Stage 3 is purely now. We are well set up now to allow the master plan process to take place. Retest everything again. There's another round of engagement, all those things, but do it with some good informed information and a clear favourite scenario 3. And sorry, a bit underwhelming. Well, it's kind of like what we're doing, but that's what the people want, and that's why we try to provide those alternative options to bring a bit of spice and something a bit more that the airport can be useful.
Yeah, I think those alternative options were really interesting and educational. I mean, and having participated in person in both phases, I think it just sort of brings some new thinking, and that's the innovation that we're all interested in pursuing.
The staff have told me this is one of the most successful consultations we've done. So in terms of online engagement, and we're going to take some learnings from that. So these guys did do a pretty good job in our world of things.
We're way over time, so I'll keep it pretty quick. We've got obviously some upgrades to contemplate for the qualifying aerodrome certification anyway, which I think is coming to us under a separate stream of work. But what would be good to know when this comes back to us is what any upgrades we have to do for the scenarios. What is the difference above and beyond what we have to do anyway for that certification? And then also, maybe that's looking at what happens if we go to scenario 3, but without knowing what future holds. It would also be useful to know what might be required to go to the next stage as well. So there's future scenario 4. Some of these upgrades have quite a long lifetime. So, say for example, security fencing, if we've got to upgrade it anyway, how much do we have to spend above what we need to do under that certification? Scenario 3, and then what's the next step?
And just one clarification is that under the qualifying status, we are required to undertake a master planning process anyway.
Right.
So that would need to.
Those costs have already. That's all. That's done from me.
Thank you very much. I think we've been here all day, but we're beyond our allocated time. So thank you very much for presenting. I know the community here is going to watch the future with great interest and sure will be part of it.
And
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.